Still populating. Alright, I'm ready. I'm gonna go on mute. I'm gonna count you down. Is that right?
All right, guys, we're back. We're live. This is Bitcoin Magazine Live's 21st episode. So pretty excited to have you all with us today. Let's see what's happening. Give us the shout out in the chat. Let me know where you're coming in from. I see Eastside Tony always here. I see a couple of new people in the YouTube chat. What's up, guys? You're going to have a chance during today's live stream to earn some free Bitcoin if you are the first to redeem a Carrot code in the Carrot app, for which a QR code will be on screen. You will get free sats, which are fractions of a Bitcoin. If we take this just back to the fundamentals here real quick, there are 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. You can definitely afford Bitcoin. If you can afford a couple pennies worth, you'll have several dozens of units of Bitcoin, which are Satoshis. Currently, the price of Bitcoin sits at $42,000, just hovering near $42,100 according to the Clark Moody dashboard. The market cap is at 797 billion, so we're sitting pretty well under $1 trillion now. And the sats per dollar, the amount of fractions of a Bitcoin you get per dollar is 2,376, which is a steal. I always like to see us above 2,000 sats per dollar. Get a little bearish on the price. I enjoy when it's this low. I think it's easier to stack and accumulate. It's better for small shrimps and fish like us that are just day by day just accumulating Bitcoin. And our time for high prices will come, guys. There's no need to rush it. This is not a get rich quick scheme. This is like a stay rich slow kind of thing here. This is Bitcoin is savings. We're not here to pump and crash, but we do have some volatility now and then. Animal Vid says Bitcoin crash is here, 20K next. Animal Vids in the chat. I don't know if you know something I don't, but 20K would be interesting. That would mean that there's a lot more shaky pleb hands out there than I thought. I mean, I think we're sitting with institutional money well into the 30s, into the 30Ks, but we'll see. Actually, if we drop down to 20K, I'm gonna have to get a hold of some more dry powder, get some more cash, and buy up all that Bitcoin, because that's just too cheap. Yeah, you should definitely BTFD if we go down to 20K. You guys should be buying this. People get complacent. They forget. You get bored with Bitcoin when the price isn't pumping, but this is the time, man. This is the kingmaker right here. We're down at 42, well below the all-time high of $69,000. This is when you can accumulate. This is when you get your friends and family in. They'll be, hemming and hawing, and they don't want to accumulate at lower prices. Everyone, you're like programmed backwards. You want to get into Bitcoin when it's exciting, when it's in the news, when it's hitting all-time highs, but that's the expensive time. And then the market cools off a bit, and now you're sitting below the price you bought in at, and that's no fun. I would say just buy often, buy always, but if you're looking to make an entry into the market, why not now? I'm sure we haven't heard, at least I haven't seen any new news out of Michael Saylor this week, but I'm sure if he could, they're out there buying this dip. I'm sure Bukele is trying to buy the dip. He's busy. We're going to cover Bukele, his trip to Turkey to talk with some officials there. Hopefully he had kind of a vague tweet about red pilling, or in this case, orange pilling, the leaders of Turkey, to hopefully get them into Bitcoin. Maybe they'll make Bitcoin their illegal currency as well. We've been waiting eagerly. I mean, this is definitely going to be the year that more countries adopt it. if they do. I mean, I guess if there's a huge price decline, it might just be El Salvador for a while. But I think the key here is in differentiating like the public announcement of that adoption, because I think without a doubt countries are in and accumulating. I think Russia, I think the Ukraine, I think Germany, the United States, all of them have held Bitcoin and they know how to use it in various departments of the government, because they confiscate it. They confiscate it from hackers, other small groups. Sometimes they auction it off, but they haven't auctioned off all of the Bitcoin they've confiscated. So they know how to hold it. It's plain and simple how to do. If you're interested, you just, you know what I mean. Anyone can figure it out. So it's not that I think that the governments are too dumb to use Bitcoin. I think actually the opposite is true. If anyone at a high level of government has the resources to kind of put some teams on this and do some hard thinking. I mean, the game theory is obvious. Bitcoin rewards early adopters, like you guys and like myself, and it punishes laggards, right? So this is called the prisoner's dilemma. Basically, first movers are always, kind of going to be at an advantage here, but you're forced to play. Every country, every government, every citizen is going to be forced to play the Bitcoin game, because there's a scarce amount of Bitcoin, and it's the strongest form of energy, the most perfectly stored form of energy that we have. It's the closest thing to a perfect energy battery that there is, and everyone's going to want a piece of that pie, but it's limited. The more Bitcoin I own, the less you can own, and that's the way it is. That's the way it is for everyone. But there's still an incredible amount out there. There's more Bitcoin being mined every day. So at the same time, the opportunities are kind of infinite. So have some urgency in your accumulation. It's fun. It'll only reward you in the long term, and you're basically, I always think of it as putting away time now for time later. You put the work in, you offer someone value through a service or a good. In exchange, you get Bitcoin. You take that Bitcoin, you store that time away for later. If you try that those same couple economic trades with something like the dollar, what happens is your time is kind of bastardized and depreciated arbitrarily by the Fed. So they're going to tax it, which is a form of theft. They're going to take it from you and they're going to inflate it away. So you're being taxed at both ends. You have no stable monetary measure. You don't know what's going to happen next year. We don't know how much they're going to print this year. We're still early here in this year. So you can't properly plan for your future. You can't use money to alleviate future uncertainty. But with Bitcoin, let's say you have 10 Bitcoins. I know I have 10 Bitcoin until I choose to sell them, right? So it's a little different. There's no inflation. There's no one that can use governance to take that possession from you and devalue your time in that way. So, I mean, these are pretty entry level, like basic concepts, but I think they can be kind of life changing. They were for me, and mind altering if articulated the right way at the right time for a handful of individuals. So it's important to just reiterate in every way conceivable, just these basic fundamentals, this economic scarcity, this true scarcity of which there is no other. This is actually one of the fundamental features of Bitcoin that we don't talk about enough. So Bitcoin is scarce in a way that nothing else is. Everything else, anything that's made of atoms, can be constructed in theory through, an atomic replicator. And if you don't think, that kind of nano construction is where we're headed, well, in the fiat world, we might not be headed there, because then again, like, science isn't very effective in fiat because they run into all of these governance problems. They run into energy allocation problems because we're not allowed to use energy efficiently in this society anymore. You see us regressing back into the 1900s with the forced implementation of solar and wind energy, which are not they're not sustainable, they're not reliable forms of power. Generally, like, people have less power at their disposal, less energy at their disposal, and for a much higher price. The price of electricity in Germany is up 2 or 3 fold since I lived there in just 10 years. So think about that. That speaks to inflation. It doesn't matter what you want to call it, these supply chain issues, it's all part of the same central planning problem. And they're problems that Bitcoin seeks to fix from the outside. Yeah, my producer's chiming in. California energy prices are on the rise as well, because you have this society that's like fixated on virtue signaling rather than like actually solving problems. We solved energy problems long ago. We solved transporting electricity, and there's a lot of ways to make it better. Bitcoin is sorry, I'm just reading some of the chats here. Yeah, Bitcoin is probably one of the best ways to transport and store energy remotely and resource sort of green energy. We're gonna hear about this tomorrow. We've got a congressional hearing about the energy usage of Bitcoin mining and its consequences. A lot of people engage in this discussion not really in good faith. They don't come to the table with all the facts. So hopefully we're going to set Congress straight, and the Committee on Commerce, the Energy and Commerce Oversight Subcommittee, I believe it's called. Hopefully they'll be set straight on some of these fear and uncertainty and doubt, like common arguments against Bitcoin's energy usage. Some of the problems I've been trying to describe here just shortly this morning, they're solved through Bitcoin, and these are trillion dollar problems. It's worth all the energy expenditure, in my opinion, to secure sovereign money that can't be debased for every person who wants to join the network. That's potentially everybody on Earth that has access to internet, even just momentarily, can now own property that is very, very hard to, if not impossible, to compromise if they do it correctly. So that's whatever the energy expenditure of Bitcoin, whatever that measures up to. I think it's worthwhile. And I think in general there's an issue with kind of attaching negativity to energy usage. I have yet to see good evidence that trace gases in our atmosphere are like boiling the oceans or causing climate change or global warming. The climate has always changed throughout history. You can't point to causation in these cases. You can't show me a scientist who produces an experiment that I can replicate at home, or that a more well-funded version of me can replicate at home. These studies don't exist. They are solutions looking for a problem. They're products that they're trying to pawn off on people. Take a look at Tesla. Doesn't fundamentally solve any sort of energy problem. You still gotta burn that coal. You still gotta get that energy and have that combustion occur. You're just outsourcing it out of your car into a power plant. People still charge their Teslas at home. So just be wary of those products and look into it, guys. I think Bitcoin's willing to engage in good faith in these energy discussions, but people gotta get real, get a little bit more realistic about this stuff. Anyway, that's about enough for me. We'll give you guys a little bit of Satoshis now. Someone said I'm gonna get banned again. Yeah, probably. We're gonna have Nolan here to do the Breakup episode 3. I'm really excited. He is way more articulate than I, so stay tuned. We'll give away some Bitcoin now. There should be a QR code on screen. Download the Earn Carrot app. Just a reminder, guys, only first come, first serve on the carrot code. So the first person to enter it in and wins the Satoshis. If you didn't win, then just that, you didn't win. Your screen will go blank, or it'll give you some kind of error. Everyone else, congrats on your Bitcoin. We'll give out more throughout the show. And just to give you a sense of the lineup for the day, we've got Q, fan favorite, Q and Eric Yakes coming on after Nolan. We've got folks from Zebedee coming on to talk, and you guys are going to get to, see and hear my producer, Chris, again. Very exciting interview. And then we're going to round it out with the deep dive. We're going to talk about, just do a deep dive into the deep dive with Dylan LeClaire and Sam Rule. So everybody loves that. Great to have Dylan on the show again. We should have CK back as well. So without further small ado, we'll have a small break and then we'll be back with Nolan.
Hey, how's it going, Nolan? How's it going, Nolan? I don't think we can hear you. Yep, now we're good. Just letting you know, I think you keep calling Alex McShane. His name's Alex. McShane's his Twitter handle. All right, we're live in 10 seconds. See you later, guys.
Don't worry about it.
I won't get it wrong.
Good to see you.
I said it right as it was coming out of my mouth. I said, that's not his fucking name.
We're back, guys. We've got Nolan back for another episode of the Breakup. What are you talking about today, Nolan? I'm super excited.
Yeah, today's a fun one. So normally I'm going to take mainstream media headlines and filter them through. Every now and again, we'll pick something up from crypto Twitter and all the stuff that's going on in that world. So it's about financial relationships, this show. It's about the relationships that go into making dollars, the relationships that go into making Bitcoin, and we contrast those financial relationships and apply that filter to mainstream news stories and everything like that. But as I said, today's a little different because the story I want to talk about is about a different kind of financial relationship, one that isn't even always financial. It's about making babies, right? Sexual relationships. So today, it's not just about financial ones. There's a bit of money involved because Elon Musk, one of the most interesting people in the world, we can all agree, like him or hate him, one of the most interesting people in the world. And the Dogecoin guy said, we should be much more worried, remember the word worried, much more worried about population collapse. Okay, we should be much more worried about population collapse. I'm with you. Maybe. Saying it to be shocking to the Malthusians, perhaps, who are always saying there's too many people. I'm down with what he's saying. Vitalik Buterin, if you don't know who he is, he created Ethereum. It's another blockchain, right? A lot of people know him. Maybe not around here, but it's pretty famous. And he went into the thread and replied, disparities in economic success between men and women are far larger once marriage and children enter the picture. Synthetic wombs would remove the high burden of pregnancy, significantly reducing the inequality. Sounds like it makes sense, right? It does kind of make sense. But let's go back to the worry piece. Right, the worry piece. That was what caught my attention. So Elon Musk said we should be more worried, or we're not worried enough, or something along those lines. And it's contrasted with, here's a solution. Synthetic wombs. Are synthetic wombs actually a solution to the population problem? Now, I use this framework called the fourth turning analysis. You can apply it to a lot of stuff. You hear it a lot in the Bitcoin space. Max Kaiser brings it up a lot. There's all kinds of people in the industry, especially Bitcoiners, who feel like the fourth turning is a useful framework. So I'm not inventing anything new. I'm applying this framework, and I'll let you know why synthetic wombs are a problem for Bitcoin in particular, and why some financial relationships, especially around those that are going to create the next generation of children, so Elon Musk's worry, might not be apparent if we start looking through this fourth turning analysis and apply some Bitcoin to it. So fourth turning analysis. Fourth turning, I first learned about fourth turning from Willy Woo, a very famous, who even knows how to describe him in Bitcoin, artist in some ways. His shit flows downwards painting, I tried to get hung up in the MoMA. It's all the charts of all the coins that sort of come and go and everything next to the Bitcoin network. It's a pretty nice piece of art. So Willy Woo first taught me about the fourth turning a few years ago, just in time for 2020, COVID, and all that stuff. If you want the best resource on fourth turning, so fourth turning, first of all, was a book written in the 1990s. And the reason why it has so many legs now is because it predicted 2020 really well. Not only did it predict 2020 really well, it was actually a marketing handbook for the entire late 90s and early 2000s. the authors of the book literally invented the word millennial and predicted a lot of their consumption habits, their tastes, and all kinds of other things. So they were that, you know, sort of guys that you would hire in order to understand the psychology of consumers a little better. Really important point as we continue on in here, because I'll be mentioning the psychology of consumers a lot more in a second. So this book, Fourth Turning, the best explanation you can get on it is the book, I guess, takes a long time to read, very academic, written in the 90s. Real Vision did a 4-part series on it and you can get that on YouTube, pretty good. They interview the Neil Howe, the author of the book, in 4 different places around Washington, D.C., with the backdrop being from that era each time. So really, really interesting production value. But the best video out there to get, and you'll understand the whole thing in under 10 minutes, is by a guy named Van Neistat, so Casey Neistat's brother. Van Neistat, these guys basically invented viral videos and all that kind of stuff. They would drive bicycles through the Holland Tunnel in New York City in like 2000 and upload it to LimeWire and Kazaa, and they went viral because it was crazy to go through traffic at the time. And so these guys, huge success, huge career, some of the best YouTube video makers you will ever see. And so I direct you to Van Neistat's video, which he made this year on the Fourth Turning. And it's about 10 minutes, and I've copied a bit of his framework. He uses like a rolled paper and is able to almost animate the video. It's amazing. So I won't go too much into the Fourth Turning, but I'll borrow some of his terms here. I borrowed quite a few of them. The way he describes it, instead of the word they use in, so the basic gist of it is history is not a linear path. You can't just look at random dates assigned to eras like the Gilded Age and the Renaissance, and then when did that happen again? And I don't remember what was the date. That's not the right way to look at history. You look at history in terms of a human lifespan, 80 years, and you can break that human lifespan down to generations, 20 years each, and they end up following the seasons. They follow the seasons. There's a summer, a winter, you know, you get it. There's a beginning, middle, and an end to the whole thing. So 4 seasons. And it's remarkably predictive going forward, and it checks out going backwards. So you apply this framework to American history, and you see that 80-year blocks are a really useful way to understand what happened, and they check out each of those 20-year blocks. So 80 years ago, we had World War II. 80 years before that, the Civil War. 80 years before that, the Revolutionary War. 80 years before that, it was sort of the beginning of that travel time, and England had its own civil war. So the Anglo-American piece starts taking over, and you can kind of imagine why, right? You have a generation that does really well, and then it takes a little while, and then the grandkids aren't doing so great. And the way it was broken down in this is you've got a high that lasts about 20 years, and an awakening period that lasts about 20 years, and an unraveling period, and finally a crisis period. The way the history blocks are broken down since World War II is we've got 46 to 64. The assassination of John F. Kennedy at the end of 63 is really the end of that golden era. What you've got is the beginning of rock and roll. You've got a really positive America where if you're just a single income earner pumping gas, you can actually have a home and kids and everything. And that's where the baby boom comes from. And that's really important because we're going to discuss that again with what Elon Musk said. Should we be worried about a baby boom or population collapse, right? So remember that. In the 1950s, the late 40s and early 50s, the economic conditions at the time made it easy to have kids. You just go buy a house and have kids. Who cares, right? It was that simple. You didn't really have to worry too much. And what we talked about on yesterday's show, a little bit about property taxes and what neighborhood you want to live in and what school your kids should go to, and then buying a house is like the most active way you can be a consumer of education. All that was a lot easier in the 1950s because the money was brand new and the system was brand new and it kind of worked. And you go to 64, and now we start seeing what we call the awakening. You've got Bob Dylan, LSD, computers, Star Wars. The old one, you know, you had the fun stuff, space, jets, Corvette, bikinis, and now we start seeing that it's not quite as fun. So LSD is fun, but it's not quite the same experience as what happened before that. Then we see from 1984, what Van Neistat used as the pivot would be Reagan's second inauguration. I'll get to why that's important, because you can actually line this up with a real Bitcoin worldview and understand it quite well after. And then that era ends, of course, with the 2008 financial crisis. Now compare again these cultural trends, right? We go to the Berlin Wall, we've got the O.J. Simpson trial, 9/11, Kurt Cobain, NWA, you've got artists singing about urban decay. You've got, it's not a happy time necessarily if you contrast it with the 1950s, right? It's not the same messages, it's not the same feeling in America. And then finally we come to 2008 till today. We've got a political divide, we've got COVID. And this is the thing, they predicted in this book written in 1997 that there would be something like a pandemic in the year 2020, and the repercussions would look a lot like they look today. So they predicted a pandemic as an example. They didn't predict that there would be a pandemic in 2020. They said there could be something like a pandemic, and then they described exactly the scenarios that we see today. Coercion, social manipulation, all things where neighbors are not necessarily getting along anymore. And let's remember that the vaccine mandates, COVID mask stuff, I'm not so worried about the government. It's your neighbor doing this, right? It's neighbors. It's all of us together. We're making choices that are really difficult to risk manage a lot of people at once, and there is no right or wrong answer, but you're seeing why neighbors are pitted against each other. Now let's go back to the Bitcoin way of seeing this. So I read Saifedean's fiat standard when it came out last summer, and one thing I'll say that I appreciate about it is that he mentioned that fiat currency was an innovation in its time. We have to respect that. If you look back to this high, as I mentioned, the guy pumping the gas, single income was able to work pretty well. It made sense at the time and it worked. Entropy set in, and it didn't work after. But for that early time, the Keynesians looked like they had it figured out. It looked good. Now what we see is, now we say it's the assassination of Kennedy, and then the gold standard falls in 1971 for those who weren't aware, and then that pivots the economy. But the conditions for the 1971 exiting of the gold standard by the Nixon administration started earlier. It started with those countries that America helped win this war saying, well, you might not be the safest country anymore for our gold. I don't know, we left it all there during World War II. Can we start buying it back? And America couldn't keep control of the gold anymore. They had to send it to the countries like Germany and France that wanted it back. And that took a few years to play out. So finally in 1971, when America realized this was going to be a drain, they said, well, enough, right? We're just going to go full fiat and we'll see how it goes. Now, it's a great thing for America, great thing for America. It had helped New York City a great deal for a long time. But then, of course, that's only went to 1984. They unleashed forces on the 1970s economy like inflation. They had to have those super high interest rates because they had to be serious about it. It was real cause and effect back then. It couldn't be wiped away with policy. But this Reagan 84 election has a major, major change because, of course, Reagan embraces Reaganomics, and he embraces high deficit spending in order to win the Cold War. So it's about spending as much as you can and lowering taxes. And that's where that huge American consumption machine goes into play. That idea of consumption economy as military protection came from Eisenhower in this era. Eisenhower, who understood the army very well, was not interested in more missiles. He was interested in an economy that had capacity to make more missiles when needed. He had a real tension against the military establishment. Of course, everyone remembers his famous speech. His idea was to make sure Americans bought a lot of stuff, and they thought they needed a lot of stuff. So the 1950s was about washing machines, buy this, buy that. And there was a guy named Bernays who realized that that was a good way to protect the country in the Cold War, make America so much richer, spend so much more money that no matter what, we'll have the strongest military just because we have the industrial capacity to pivot when we want. So it was not to stockpile missiles originally, right? It wasn't that. It was, let's be able to flex if we need to, but let's pacify now. And Eisenhower had that mentality. So in the end, we got the worst of both worlds because we got the consumption economy, but we'd stockpile the missiles too. So it wasn't exactly as Eisenhower intended. But the consumption piece ends up becoming really important here, because basically America says we can outspend the Soviet Union, we can collapse the economic system. And they were right, it worked, right? And that's where you start to get into this unraveling. It did work. But the problem is, America got addicted to those economic policies that were really mobilized to win a war. It wasn't really like, what do we do about this in 25 years when we've got housing prices? They couldn't have predicted what that was going to do. They did manage with policy to suppress interest rates and increase supply of money, but not inflation, because the demand for US dollars was global. It was a global economy that America ran. It was when you win the fight, you win the fight. There was no one else, right? So it bred a certain amount of complacency, or who knows what, just no one was in charge, nobody home. Wall Street was as Wild West as you want it to be, really. You don't want to control it too much. It's got to be bottled lightning, and it's got to be able to fail and lose and do all those things. It did all those things and more. So now you've got this wealth gap, right? You've got this wealth gap. And that's where Elon Musk's, I think anyway, Elon Musk's problem, or the problem we identify, lies, right? We have this huge falling birth rate. You go to Japan, one of the great examples of it, I've lived in Japan a few times in my life, and it's pretty eerie when you go to the countryside and you see entire towns where there was a park for children with grass this high because it hasn't been children in 20 years. And then maybe you'll see 2 or 3 old people with canes walking down the road, but they're the only ones left in town. There's nobody else. The cities, you don't see that if you're in Tokyo or Osaka and these other places. Now, do they need 127 million people in that small place? I mean, it's pretty rural as it is, so they could probably even fit more. But, you know, quality of life, who knows? It's not for me to say what they do. They'll probably invent enough robots that it'll be just fine in that country, so we'll see. They've also stepped up immigration, so Japan has changed quite a bit as far as filling these towns, and we'll see what goes on in the future. But nevertheless, the economic considerations for Japanese people to have children are great. Children are expensive. It's not that simple anymore. And why is that? Well, we said yesterday, buying a house, getting in the right school district, all these things become really, really difficult. And the cost of modern life for normal families is tough. So how do you get out of this, right? How does this change? Well, when we think of the Bitcoin Center, one of the interesting things, and this is not a prediction necessarily, and not even, maybe we'll see, but it is amazing that the 80-year blocks also fit with 2 Bitcoin halvings from now. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. They're fitting right on time. So when I call this World War III, right? When I see this World War III, you can take the frame that as bad as things look right now in a crisis, the good things that will make it a golden age, again, right, a high, are just around the corner. And when you look at the early Bitcoin community, we can see those threads there already, things that could easily become dominant in the culture. So I call this the be high generation, right? We're already in space, right? We've already got miners up there. All those rockets that Elon Musk is sending up to space every day, inside of them are low orbit satellites that are just flying out of these rockets. And those will actually unwind us from our internet service providers, these bloodsuckers that will for sure clamp us down for anything that we do, right? I mean, Bitcoin has a very great danger with these, where you plug into the internet, where you get your signal. All of these satellites with Starlink now are going to unbind us from all of that stuff. We'll be able to have this transmission from any island, not just Barbados, where I am now, that has good internet connection, but I'll be able to go anywhere in the jungle, right? Because you can have unbound internet connection. And space is really everything, right? There's so much to do there. And when you look at the advantage that some miners have, I remember a presentation years ago by Peter Todd on Breaking Bitcoin called "If Elon Musk is a Space Pirate." And what he said was, you can get free solar energy unfettered by the atmosphere with satellites in space that, with the latency of mining from space to Earth, wouldn't be so great. So you can mine for free, right? It's a pretty dastardly attack on Bitcoin, but it checks out, right? It could be there. Now, I'm sure there'll be competition and it won't be that simple, but one can imagine miners in space pretty easily for that reason, especially when we've got a fellow like that, the Dogecoin guy, throwing them up every day, right? The other one I believe you'll have is this sort of inexpensive luxury, right? So you'll be able to travel different places and it won't be that expensive. Now, I don't mean you're going to be in a vehicle that is like, you know, not exactly like a Tesla car, but if you want to increase the birth rate, imagine you're in a car that's self-driving and it's like a living room and you can actually travel. And I'm pretty sure baby making is going to happen if you're not even driving. If you're just like, let's go down the coast, and you're actually in your moving living room, right? And when you actually look at the parts that go into these electric vehicles, you have to imagine a complete price collapse of them. So we see them as expensive today, but when you actually look at the number of parts in an electric vehicle, it's minimal compared to a combustion engine. We go from like, I don't know, over 10,000 little parts to, you know, a couple of thousand. And the simplicity of not having to have a, you know, burn carbon engine, just a simple drivetrain that works on a supercapacitor battery, you can start having a tinkering industry of car makers again. You could start modifying old frames, you could put batteries into them. Once you have the base units, you can get back to that old 1950s, I'm gonna build a hot rod and go cruising down the road and have fun. But you can do it in a way that will probably make more baby making, because as I said, there might even just be moving living rooms down the highway. You'll be able to travel maybe slower, but further and with greater leisure than ever before. Royalty markets. So this is something that, you know, and notice each of these qualities each of these qualities here, the way I'm describing them, what I'm actually talking about is getting rid of those trusted third parties, the ones that are critical to get rid of. So if we look at space, it's really about getting right now our internet service providers and all those guys having a direct link to a global communications network that doesn't rely on expensive physical infrastructure on the ground that they can choke. Inexpensive luxury, that's really, again, third parties. If you're able to get rid of certain corporate interests, if you're able to take houses, for example, that are no longer used as a store of value in order to fulfill the shortcomings of the money as a store of value. So that's kind of what we did as a generation here. When the money was no longer good as a store of value, people started to buy houses, and houses became a major vehicle for wealth transfer, for savings. Many people's pensions are essentially the equity of a house. Houses became a dominant feature for many great reasons. But are they the best store of value for your work and your effort? A lot of complications in there, a lot of other factors, a lot of third parties that you have to deal with. It's as I said, the school taxes, all these other things are layered on top of it, where you're living. What we've got with this COVID situation is normalization of work from home, and that definitely will break some of the entrenched interests in New York City and all these other places that have no problem. It's a real market essentially, but it's twisted by policy. And then royalty markets, what I'm saying there is you have creative class people that no longer have to go through publishers. And we're at the early stage of that right now, but as a science fiction writer myself, and the reason why I even did this fourth turning analysis and why I'm sharing all of this with you is because of this last point. So I recently wrote a science fiction book called The Satoshi Wedding Murders. And I used this fourth turning analysis to try to imagine what an entropic force on Bitcoin would look like. And in the end, what I decided was, in the story, I don't want to give too much away, but what you've got is a world with no material want, really. And markets such as prostitution have all but dissolved because no one is needing to sell themselves. However, the demand for such things is still there. People still want to buy others. That hasn't stopped. So while people don't need to do it, don't need to sell their body, other people want to buy. And in this world, secretly, covertly, there is a great effort to create basically human life again that you can own. And in my world, the entropic forces that end up threatening Bitcoin are literally life creation markets. So diverting energy that would otherwise go to hash power to creating life that really is just sycophantic followers of the people who create it. They don't really, it's a different kind of slavery. You don't necessarily own them. You engineer them to love nothing but you. And that becomes a whole new marketplace and one that does threaten Bitcoin's sort of supremacy. Never forget, in Bitcoin, it's a peer-to-peer market, right? And not everyone is the peers, right? We can all be honest about that. You're mining, you're running a node, sure, you're a peer. You're just a human being. Not always, right? Not always. And so the whole story is based on that piece. What does being a peer mean? And at a certain point, entropy can enter that definition. And in my world, being a peer ends up meaning you got to own a lot of people. Not a good thing. And so I only meant that as it's speculative fiction. I don't know if it's true, but I mean it to tie the bow on this idea of what Elon Musk said. Should we worry about birth rate? I think Bitcoin is going to usher in a high, and I think the financial relationships that come from this winning of World War III, this be high era, will take care of that problem of birth rates. The one to worry about, indeed, is the synthetic wombs. It's not a solution to the problem at all. It could be one of the most dangerous things we ever do. And in 80 years, in my story anyway, that's what Bitcoin is dealing with. It's dealing with synthetic life that's owned by other people that doesn't really participate in the network the way you would imagine. And so not a solution, definitely a problem. So a bit of a different episode today, but that's what we got.
Awesome, Nolan. Thanks a lot. I really like that comparison. I think the fourth turning is on a lot of people's minds lately.
So I recommend to everyone, go check out that Van Nuys stat. This is almost exactly copied. I put this red line in because to me, this is the fourth turning from a pure Bitcoin lens, right? We see Bretton Woods working. We see the conditions with America going just berserk in the 60s, with protests and not being seen as the safe haven where you should store your gold anymore. If you were waking up from World War II and America was clearly supreme in the end of that era, you know, it would make sense in the late 60s if you said, well, I can probably take care of myself now if you're France or Germany or something. And that's what precipitated this whole change. And of course, the conditions go straight up into the 84 era when Reagan does what it was that he did, which made sense. It was a strategic move. But the repercussions were the 08 financial crisis, and here we are.
And here we are. Hey, Q, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Thanks for letting me come on. Nolan, this has been really fun following along, man. Your segments this week have been great.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, if you go to see Van Nystadt's video on this, you're going to get a great sense of, you know, he even rolls this thing and it goes up and down, and it's top quality production. So I recommend it.
Yeah, we'll have to send a link out to the chat for our followers.
And he should make some Bitcoin videos, by the way, because if the quality of his videos for this one, for example, can be replicated in our context, it's a win for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to reach out. Listen, I think we'll catch you again tomorrow, Nolan, if I'm right. Yeah.
No, tomorrow is the one where I gotta miss.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you soon in any case.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah,
Take care.
Ciao, man.
Q, how's it going? How are the markets looking at large today?
Bro, it is absolute bloodshed out there.
Nice.
But
yeah, we were talking earlier about how, I mean, I love this time. I think we might have mentioned, I don't know, just like a year ago, it kind of felt like I think there's something to that extreme fear and greed index. Like, I think that the markets were definitely in extreme greed every single day. It felt like Bitcoin could go to $100,000, and maybe I had just surrounded myself with lunatics, but I really believed, like, man, this is going to be a tough year for accumulation because we're going to go to 100K and I'm going to have missed, like, you know, another couple good years of stacking. But now I feel like we have a breath. Everybody can comfortably get in. I feel like you could probably wait a few months and also comfortably make an entrance into Bitcoin and still do quite well.
I mean, I always go back to this notion that, again, we measure Bitcoin's value against the dollar, but if we are right and the world and future that we see comes together, we don't need to necessarily worry about the dollar so much as accumulating as many sats and Bitcoins as we can, regardless of the price. But I'm with you, dude. I was the one banging the drums this time last year. Bitcoin's going to finish 2021 at 100K. And I got a lot of, how's your portfolio looking texts on January 1st of this year. So that was fun. But, you know, Alex is right. It's still on sale. Bitcoin is. And Germano just posted a hilarious tweet that I was like, honestly, this inspired me to go stack a little more stats. But you want to counter inflation, just stack sats every day, man. It's all you got to do. Little by little, we're chipping away. And we don't know what they'll be worth. We don't know what they'll be used. I mean, the conversation that I'm about to have with Eric Yakes, I'm really excited because we're going to dissect and talk about his book. And in his book, he talks about the history of money, but more specifically, the history of banking. And then the future use cases of Bitcoin, where right now we talk a lot about Lightning Network, but we don't ever really talk about what could a Bitcoin bank look like, because we don't, I think, spend enough time talking about like what is the history of the banking industry, going as far back as the early days of the Renaissance in Venice all the way back in the 1400s. So I'm excited to have that conversation and let you guys sort of think on some of the things we're going to talk about there.
Yeah, that sounds great, man. I mean, just in general, what do you recommend? Like, what are your Bitcoin or, you know, just monetary reading recs for us here?
I mean, everyone should read The Sovereign Individual. Literally every human being. I need to just not have
blurred out.
I need to just, you guys are going to see my bedroom. It's going to happen.
Is this I recognize that book cover though. What book
Sovereign
is that?
Individual.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Everyone
Nice.
needs to read this book. They are not censoring us. I am censoring you. I don't want you guys to see my bedroom. And then another book that I'll go run in a second to grab and show you guys, but I am hoping to have the author of the 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. Shout out my buddy Kyle Foreman, who got me this book in college. I've read it now 3 different times. Each time it just opens my eyes wider and wider to what true market capitalism really is, what it can look like and what it can accomplish, and how far off we really are from that. It's
Are you talking about free and open markets, or are you talking about like Karl Marx capitalism?
No, free and open markets, like
Okay, I got you.
pure market capitalism. It was written by a professor of economics from the University of Cambridge. I am going to mispronounce his name, Ha-Joon Chang. I highly recommend. It is dense. It's not very long. Sovereign Individual, I'd say, is twice as long as it. But it, like, one of my favorite tidbits from the book he kind of talks about is the technological advancement in the 20th century that benefited the workforce and made our economy more efficient as far as working was actually not the computer. It was the invention of the washing machine and the dishwasher specifically, because it afforded women now the opportunity to have more free time and in turn enter the workforce. So we were able to...
Can I fast forward that discussion to yesterday when Vitalik suggested we offer the world's women even more free time by providing synthetic wombs instead of having women bear children? Did you see this?
I did not see this.
This guy's a lunatic, man. He wants all the women, because he's such an incel that he wants all the women to just like have, I don't know, look after like synthetic wombs filled with children instead of having them bear children.
I mean,
he thinks that'll solve a population issue. I'm not aware of a population issue, and I don't know whose job it is to solve that. I don't think anyone has the authority to solve for that. But I mean, where I live, we're fine.
I mean, my assumption is that is most likely a response to the Elon Musk tweet that like we're more that whole like population demise, whatever Elon specifically said. I mean, I think that's vile. I don't think, candidly, that solves the population issue. You're not stopping the population from growing by continuing to have babies, and if anything, people are incentivized in a weird way to become or to have children and carry this legacy on, or whatever it is. I mean, population control hasn't worked. Look at China now. They're desperately asking the next generation have more than one kid. We have this weird disproportion in China where you have a massive number of their population is above a certain age, and now a massive number of their population is like below 5 years old. But that middle gap of people from ages like 10 to I believe 40 is such a thin line of people in China because they had the whole one-child policy for so long. So you're seeing I have to counter that effect.
I mean, I don't know if I want to call this out by name, but the person in the comments, like, I agree with you. This is something we should explore for people who can't bear children otherwise. I'm not saying we should shut down the technology, but I don't think we should be pushing people with as much influence as like Vitalik, who I don't know how he has as much power as he has, or Elon, to promote women not carrying children who can do it otherwise. I mean, I don't know. It just seems it's a repulsive idea at the outset, but I agree with you that the technology shouldn't be defunded. I think it's important. I think I'm actually pro embryonic selection, which is like kind of out there. Like, people are not really interested in selecting for, like, even selecting one embryo for its genetic makeup over another would boost the IQ of the population over time, which is not the be all and end all, but you know, you can solve for a lot of like mental retardation, like a lot of problems by doing just simple embryonic selection. But that doesn't necessarily like that doesn't change the natural process of pregnancy to a point. And I guess to like tie this back to Bitcoin, I mean, I think like free and open markets would provide better solutions than just having like a crazy person propose that women shouldn't carry their own children anymore. Like, I think if we really had, what is someone, CK said? Yeah, CK, that's what we're talking about. Elon said that depopulation is a bigger issue than overpopulation.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think he's just trying to ruffle up the masses. It's fun to him. I don't know what his solution is except to escape to other planets, which I think is another valid solution, but we're never going to get there on a fiat system. Science doesn't have its shit together. Science doesn't even have a good definition for what science is. Science is now no different than the government. You can't find studies that aren't funded by the government anymore. They're all biased. They're all solutions looking for problems. They're not replicable at home. Like, I don't know, man. It's a huge issue, but I think it's something that we could build a basis on with Bitcoin and actually like allocate capital to solving problems that people find worth solving. Like, you're not going to give away your Bitcoin to make, you know, synthetic wombs for the for the female population across the world, right? That's something that you would generate fake, fast, easy money to sell this technology to someone else to do.
I mean, I agree with you that yes, this technology absolutely should be explored, especially for those who aren't able to carry their own children. But and maybe this is my progressive bias coming out. But candidly, I don't think Vitalik's comments were through the lens of compassion of let's help these people who aren't able to have children. I think, frankly, it's more through the lens of, yo, I want you to work more. Like, no, you don't get to take time off to be a mom. You don't get to take time off to before your pregnancy, after the pregnancy. Like, no, if I take that away from you outright, that time off you no longer can ask for, therefore you can work more. I genuinely do think that it comes from that lens, and that's a very dangerous lens, because at what point do we draw that line of, you know, family life balance? That's one of the things about Bitcoin. It doesn't just preach economics. It doesn't just preach finance. It preaches everything: philosophy, the community, economics.
Yeah, and look at, I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade at Elon and Vitalik for this, but I mean, these aren't exactly like the epitome of like leaders in terms of the family unit. I mean, these guys don't have at-home families. Doesn't Elon live in like, yeah, but doesn't he live in like a shed, like in a parking lot at SpaceX? Like, he doesn't, does he hang out with his kid? Like,
I like to, I mean, look, I'd be curious to see how many of you guys in the comments also listen to the All In podcast. Chris says he sleeps at Tesla. I absolutely agree. He definitely is a zombie. But like, you know, we don't need to get into this, but it went viral over the week of the latest episode of the All In podcast, where one of the billionaires talked about like the I'm mispronouncing that, but the Muslim population in China, and just like his really tone deaf comments about that. And like, I've been a fan of that podcast for years. Chamath specifically, I'm a huge fan of. That was like one of the first instances where I'm just like, yo, you are way off base, my guy. But
what exactly are you a fan of Chamath? Because he's been out of favor with the Bitcoin community for like a year now.
I think,
with reckless comments.
No, totally. I mean,
the genocide.
I was listening to that comment in the car with my girlfriend, and I was just like, wait, is he? No, he's not. He can't.
Yeah, he's a psychopath.
It was just
he's
like
a straight psycho.
And then the logic argument he used, I will answer your question, but like the logic argument he used, where he goes, like, I come from a nation that like has terrible human rights issues, and like by leaving, that was me saying like I don't care about these issues. And in my head, I'm like, bro, as another person who like his parents are immigrants from a Middle Eastern country, like I recognize I won a genetic lottery. I won a freaking lottery to be born here. And you did the same. You did not at 5 years old make the decision to leave Sri Lanka to move to Canada. I'm sorry. You may think you did, but you did not. You did nothing of the sort. So you won some crazy lottery that gave you the opportunities you have. And the Buddhist in me does believe in reincarnation. And I genuinely believe, Chamath, that the next life for you may not be as kind and privileged as the one you're in. But to answer your question about what I do like and respect about the man, I am a big believer. I follow finance. I aspire one day to have my own VC fund. If I can build out my portfolio well enough, it will turn into an index fund. Those are aspirations that I have on my own. And I see someone like him who has accomplished those things. But the second layer to it that I truly do admire is the fact that if you actually break down a lot of SPACs, special purpose acquisition corporations, they'll have some big name people involved. You'll get whatever the big, like, who was it? Was it Boehner? Former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, was involved in an SPAC. And that was like the marquee name. People were like, oh, if the politician's involved, he's clued into what's going on in DC. They may know something, it'll be good to go. If you actually broke down that SPAC though, he's not invested Boehner. He has $0 of his own money in there, but his name and face, and he benefits from it. Every single one of Chamath's SPACs, it's his own money. So I do have a level of respect where you put your money where your mouth is and you go after technology and you go after building out certain things that you think are beneficial, regardless of, hey, he's going to make $1 billion here, $1 billion there.
But beneficial to whom? I mean, he doesn't have like society's best interests in mind. We can't trust him to do that. Yeah. But
in this ecosystem that we currently live in, the ecosystem being the fiat system we have, this constant churning and generation of corporations, you may get 1 out of 10 of them may actually pan out and work out in the long run, but that 1 out of 10 turns into something very viable. You have investments in Virgin Galactic, you have investments in SoFi. His insurance company is very disruptive to the current system of insurance that's in place. I mean, he was part of the group that brought Slack together. How many times are we on Slack every day alone instead of having to email one another? We have to sometimes, I think, and I will shout out another friend, Daniel Carollas, not Christian Carollas, his cousin Daniel, who one time we were kind of going back and forth on a couple of authors we had read, and I was like, I can't stand that guy. He'd made a couple of comments here or there where I'm just like, dude, it's just lazy writing. He's not really an investor and he gives really bad advice. And he's like, you're right. Like he's probably one of the weaker people on this list of authors we're talking about, but he still makes 1 or 2 valid points here or there. And if you can hold on to those 1 or 2 valid points and focus on that, you can find ways to help yourself grow. And yes, every single person has faults. We're all human. Some faults are worse, like saying you don't care about human rights issues in China. That is a deplorable thing to say. I do, however, believe that in a money market that has been manipulated generation over generation, to be one of the few people to actually have your own skin in the game with an intention of disrupting long-established industries, I can respect that. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I don't know actually too much about its history. I mean, that's why I'm asking you, like, what do you find interesting about him? But I'm definitely on the side of like, I would rather take the good and like leave the bad. And the bad is like, I mean, this isn't really someone you'd want to spend much time with. It seems like he's kind of an asshole, but you know, the good is he seems to be pretty good at allocating capital, or whoever's doing that for him. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like, I don't know what these people's days look like day to day. Like, what actually are they? Like, what does Elon actually do? You know what I mean? Because he's not an inventor. He's not an engineer. He's not a politician.
You sound like Wozniak in that conversation.
What does he do?
Jobs. This is exactly what Steve Wozniak said to Steve Jobs, like right when Apple was forming. He's like, dude, you're not the inventor. You're not an engineer. Like, you're not a computer guy. Like, what value do you add to our company? And he's like, it's my vision. Like, it's my vision.
He's an oracle.
like, I mean, a friend of mine from college shared with us back then that his late father was actually Steve Jobs' college roommate, and some of the stories that he like shared with us of like what his dad saw of Steve Jobs at that time of his life is like, dude, Steve Jobs was just like a fuck boy who was taking LSD and tripping out on a random Tuesday afternoon and cutting class. Like nobody in college thought that he had any sort of like wherewithal to grow or be successful, and yet he is arguably one of the most successful businessmen of his generation, of his time. I mean, I'm literally talking to you on an Apple MacBook Air while my Apple iPhone rings after all of the iPods I have somewhere back there are collecting dust. But as far as their day to day, like, they have gotten to a point, I believe, when you're at that level, you're really good.
Someone's mad in the chat that I said he's not an engineer. I don't think he's okay. Chris, our producer, is actually an engineer. Chris, you can chime in. Does Elon Musk spend his day doing what you did as an engineer, or like, well, what is, you know what I mean? He's not an engineer. He hires engineers. Is there other people doing this for him?
But at a certain point, he did do the engineering work.
No, he didn't. For what? For which part of the Tesla? Which part of the Tesla specifically did he work on?
All right, I'm chiming in here. Hey, how's it going, guys?
There he is. There he is. Look at that handsome face.
Oh, thanks, guys. How's it going? Alex, ask the question again. Sorry, I was flipping with headsets and stuff.
We're wondering, like, whether and to what extent Elon is like an active engineer.
I think he, to be honest, I'm going to disagree with you here, Alex. I think he is.
Okay.
But he's a much better marketer than he is engineer. That's for sure.
Okay, cool. So what does he work on? Is he just overseeing all the elements? Like, does he know what goes into, like, the considerations of, like, the tires at Tesla and, like, just, like, all that stuff?
Just from hearing him speak, like when he speaks about like different engineering concepts, I think he's kind of like a macro engineer. That's kind of like he's not the only guy focusing on the tires or the electrical systems or anything. He was kind of what you call is like a production engineer, or not even a production engineer. He'd be like a process improvement engineer. So he's kind of looking at it at a macro scale. Where are the things that they're getting bottlenecked, and that's what he focuses on. So he'll probably be bossing someone around that actually knows more about the technology than him, but in doing so, he's like, we need to fix this because it's causing downtime for getting out Tesla cars. So a lot of times production engineers and process improvement engineers get into headbutts because the production engineer knows their piece of equipment or their thing that they're doing much better than the process engineer or the process improvement engineer that's kind of bossing them around. But the process improvement, their goal is to increase downtime and increase uptime. And basically make the process go faster, while the production engineer is their piece of equipment or their section of the plant. They have to be an expert in that area. So that's how I see Elon as a CEO and as an engineer.
Interesting. Love it. See? Schooled. I love this. All right. We're learning about Elon. Now we have to tie it back to Bitcoin. Q. What do you got?
Well, we'll take a long way back to Bitcoin, but another thing that I think gets overlooked, Elon, his first company was XPay, and they were acquired by PayPal. But the truth is, every piece of PayPal's technology that we interact with, as far as like the peer-to-peer money transfer, that stemmed from XPay. PayPal was nothing until they acquired Elon's technology through XPay, and that, I think, the peer-to-peer transfer, peer-to-peer money system feeds into iterations of cryptography and eventually led to Bitcoin. Boom.
Yeah, I think what we're getting at is like I don't know if it's an issue, and I'm not like anti-rich. I'm just extremely skeptical, of the motives of someone like a Chamath or an Elon, a Bezos. Certainly, like all of these men are like very impressive, very good at allocating capital. I do agree with Elon. We should actually take those decisions out of the hands of the government. I would rather they just like burned my taxes. It's actually that the government reallocates that money to these like disastrous, centrally planned projects. That's the problem. I would rather have someone like an Elon who has proven good track record of allocating capital to build successful companies. Someone like Michael Saylor. I would rather the money either disappear or go to them and put it to the betterment of society and building like awesome companies that do awesome things. But the end game for them, I don't think is to, I mean, it's hard to say what it is, but I don't think it's for you and me, right? They have their own internal motivations and desires, and they're, close friends and family that they're looking out for. So it's
like ultimately that's human nature. Like we're always going to be a tribal species. We're always going to go and protect those that we align with, regardless of what that boundary of alignment is, whether it's religion, whether it's location, whether it's economic beliefs, political beliefs, sports teams. We are a tribal type of people. That said, and one of the things you kind of bring up in this, and again continue to bring up Chamath, I believe it was back in November, they started talking about, like, there's a reason Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in particular, the two best capital allocators of a generation, if you strictly looked at the returns that they got for Tesla and Amazon respectively over the course of the life of those companies, those returns that they got year over year on average are better than some of the best VC firms could have ever gotten you. So that just tells you right there that they are the best capital allocators, better than the best guys on Wall Street. So yes, they probably know better what to do and how to build out businesses and sectors than anyone else, Wall Street, DC, you or me, no doubt about it. So the alarm bell is ringing when Elon Musk, who is asking for financial advice, should I sell Tesla stock? Meanwhile, 2 months before that, he had already filed to sell stock. Jeff Bezos is exiting his position on the basis of, I want to donate this money. Let's be real. They're billionaires not because they were donating their money out of the goodness of their hearts or because they took financial advice from their Twitter followers. They're billionaires because they saw things in the market before other people and they got there first. And so the thing that they saw was a potential decline in the market. So they were, for the first time in over a decade, exiting their market positions. Even if it's just a fraction of their position, they're still exiting. They're still now going into a cash. And since that time back in November, the markets have been ugly. Like one
place I think I would disagree with you is that if you and I thought that Elon Musk was better at allocating capital than us, would we not just follow his moves? Would we not just invest into his companies?
Well, you can only invest in Tesla. SpaceX isn't public. Solar City is not public.
Yeah. I'm saying I don't. It seems like a flaw. Like I wouldn't put money into Tesla. I think Elon's making a mistake by not buying Bitcoin, buying more Bitcoin than they have, by not accepting it. I think these are silly business decisions. We'll see how that bears out, but I do agree with you. They do, they are better at bringing products to market, say, than you or an I.
Definitely. I also I do agree that some of there being Tesla's recent decisions regarding Bitcoin, like to stop the ability to buy a Tesla with Bitcoin, to flip the script and say, oh, you can use Doge to buy our whatever, like meme trolling gifts, but you can't use Bitcoin to do it. These are backwards decisions. However, if we zoom out, Tesla only announced that they bought Bitcoin a year ago. In fact, it's only been 11 months since they announced that they bought Bitcoin. We're still early into a lot of this. The only reason they sold even a fraction of their position was so that Elon could show and explain to their board how liquid this asset really is. Most companies, most businesses that are publicly traded of a certain size tend to take some of their cash reserve and then literally go and reinvest it in the stock market. It's what led to GM's demise. It's what essentially led to the entire car industry out of Detroit. They were all doing exactly that. They were invested in the stock market with their extra cash. So when they got hurt and the whole stock market got hurt, they were essentially overexposed and they felt the volatility so much more. That's part of the logic of why we had to go bail them out. But part of the logic of that book that I mentioned, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, is that is essentially the true market saying, hey, you made a bad investment decision, you made a mistake, and there are losses that come with mistakes, and we have to eat those up. I think one thing that will trigger Tesla to go back on their Bitcoin stance as far as purchases is once another one of their competitors, most likely out of, it won't be China because China won't let you transact Bitcoin for now. More than likely it'll be Latin America, but I don't believe Tesla is really selling a ton of cars in El Salvador at the moment. So that's not really going to be.
Are they selling a lot of cars anywhere? How is their sales looking? We also gotta address this before this comment gets away. We've got the world famous Planet Musk vlog is in our comments trolling us, telling us to build AI companies for ourselves, telling us to build a Neuralink, a Starlink, a Boring company. I'm sorry, what have these companies done for society? Why would I do that? No, I'm going to buy Bitcoin instead.
I will say this, SpaceX.
Maybe Starlink has some promise. SpaceX is.
No, dude, I disagree with that. I disagree because I come from the camp that I believe space exploration is vital to the advancement of
I do too. But what has he explored? We're not getting off the ground here. He needs more Bitcoin so he can actually carry out these projects.
SpaceX was the first to develop a rocket that can land and relaunch. We're no longer wasting rockets one launch at a time. This is the first iteration of that.
Let's get it on Mars. Let's go, Elon. He's got to focus. This guy's he's too divided, man.
You're like, why didn't we win the Super Bowl? Why didn't he pass it to that guy? Like, it's so obvious. 15 minutes later, it's obvious that he should have just done that.
Well, no, this guy's just saying, like, I'm just confused. I'm confused why I wouldn't spend my time building something like a Boring company. The Boring company hasn't solved transportation issues in Los Angeles. I don't care how cool it is. Like, it's great that he's building tunnels under Las Vegas, but you've got a 3D living and working space and a 2D grid still.
Yeah, I mean,
and yet I do kind of agree with, like, there are a lot of problems to solve here on Earth, such as the monetary system before we make our exit to another planet. But macro scope, I totally agree. I think growing out to other planets is all there is for us to do, really, as a species. Continue exploring and growing. So I mean I think it's great. I just I think the focus is a little all over the place, but maybe it's just a ploy to get more money to explore space. I don't know.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, hang on.
Elon's plans for 30 years in the future. That's good. Yeah, I think I don't know who said this, but if your plans don't outpace, like, your lifetime, you're probably not thinking big enough. I agree with that. That's a good way to be. But yeah, I agree with John P on this. People treat Elon and his inventions like a religion. This is just a very good Elon's small beginning.
I mean, does the Bitcoin community not treat Bitcoin as a religion? I'll tap in Joe Rogers and his desire for the cult of Bitcoin.
I think some of them do. I don't know. I would trust Bitcoin over Musk, though. That's like a very centralized point of failure as my religion.
I think Musk himself is a beneficiary of the fiat system. We've talked about it on this show numerous times. He's one of as the wealthiest person in the world, he stands to lose the most should we leave the fiat system and go to a Bitcoin standard. Like, it's simple. I think logic when you start to walk it back in that lens of who stands to lose the most if the dollar is worthless, and then at the same time who stands to gain the most when you see that who loses the most, the US government, the 1%, the wealthiest class of people. They're never going to outright say, yes, let's go into Bitcoin until they think that their Bitcoin position is large enough to maintain their current status. So
right.
I almost want to argue and say, I hear what he says, but the sheer fact that he keeps Bitcoin on the balance sheet, the sheer fact that they could have sold it all. He could have exited that position at any point in the last 11 months, and he continues to hold. That tells me there's something else going on. When he comes out and says, I do also hold Bitcoin as well as some other tokens, or as well as some other cryptocurrencies in my own private portfolio, again, that tells me, okay, this dude is probably accumulating. And he's literally sitting there and he has a number where he's like, once I get to this number, then I'll tell my people like, yo, we're all in on Bitcoin because I maintain my power. I maintain my status at this level. I want to throw out a conspiracy theory off topic, but like on topic.
What is it? If it's that Elon Musk made Bitcoin, I'm gonna remove you from the call.
It's about Adam and Eve. And like specifically, okay. I am of the camp that we do need to solve some problems here on Earth before we start just going to another planet, because we're just doomed to make the same mistakes over again. And I love this theory where what if the frozen water on Mars was in fact our original ocean, and Mars was in fact where mankind originated, but we had destroyed that planet so much that we sent a shuttle from Mars to Earth to restart the human population, and the people who were in that shuttle were Adam and Eve.
I mean, it seems not like the simplest explanation to me, but plausible. But I would pull Occam's razor on you there.
I'm gonna put a tinfoil hat on next time I bring something like this up.
Yeah, we can do a tinfoil hat segment. I love conspiracies. It was fun to play devil's advocate against Musk. I don't know. I think I agree with most of your points. It was nice hearing an engineer's perspective. We got to bring Chris on again to really break down Elon Musk for us sometime. That was fun.
Yeah, dude. Chris also is the only reason all of you on YouTube are able to watch this and enjoy this. So we want more Chris.
Yeah, exactly. And all right, it looks like Eric Yakes is here, so I'm excited to hear this book club segment, Q.
Awesome.
I'm gonna let him in. We'll go to a short break, guys, and then we'll be back with Q and Eric. Thanks, Q.
What is up, guys? I have officially kicked Alex out, and it is just you, me, and I'm joined by author Eric Yakes. I'm so sorry, man. I had the absolute pleasure of reading his book, The Seventh Property, Bitcoin and the Monetary Revolution. When I say I couldn't put this book down, I mean, like back when Harry Potter first came out and I stayed up until 1 a.m. to know what happened, I was complaining to our producer, Chris, like I stayed up too late reading a book for the first time in God knows how long. Eric, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the show.
Dude, the Harry Potter comparison, that was a first. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Dude, I mean, I'm a nerd. I just am. I've read tons of books about like what is money as my Bitcoin education and all of these different Bitcoin books. But I thought one thing that you did that I have never seen another book do, and if there are other books that do this, like I would love to dive into, but the first half of your book, instead of the traditional, like, what is money? What is the history of money? You do that, but you also spend a lot more time. What is the history of banking? What are the history and how were banks formed? And my dad and I have been having a lot of conversations over the dinner table about your book. So thank you for that. I want to start the conversation there because it was practically kismet. I read the section about, going off the gold standard is actually a very common thing that has happened throughout the history of banks. We've seen it in England, we saw it in Italy and Venice, and we saw it in France as well. And we witnessed it here 50 years ago in this country. And it seems like it's almost like almost not necessarily guarantee, but when you get to that point where you're now on a purely fiat system, eventually inflation starts to kick in. And like, it's like a twitch from these governments to turn around, and their first response is, we're going to force prices to stay where they're at. We're going to decree that prices stay where they're at. I read that segment, and then yesterday CNN starts posting all that crap. Should the government control the price of food and gas? So I want to start our conversation there and kind of break it down for our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's definitely when I got into this space. One of the big differentiators that with my book too, I think a lot of the material that I saw is that, there weren't a lot of people talking about banking. And the resources that you have are either like very technical or, very technical, like academic papers, or, older Austrian works that are like these, bricks that, a lot of people in this industry might be reading, but very few other people are going to spend the time to read something like that. And then there's books like, The Creature of Jekyll Island is another one that's also a really big brick. And they spend a lot of time talking about things outside of just banking. But I realized really quickly is like, you either have like that world of this very laborious way of getting your head around some of this stuff. And it still was there wasn't anything I encountered that was still incredibly clear to me. Or you have this highly simplified, like Investopedia type resources that explain banking, and that doesn't really get you anywhere. So that was one of the big things that I wanted to focus on in it, was just to give people that understanding, because it's impossible to talk about money without talking about how banking evolved, because the two work the same. They're both dependent upon one another, and we can see today with how our monetary system exists, it is just practically a banking system, and money is just a function used within it. But money, in historical periods was much more independent of a lot of those functions. And I think that having that distinction and seeing how that evolution occurred is, it's incredibly important. And so, what I get into with the book is I start off and I just like, I make this point and I say like, look, if we go far enough back and we look at like primitive societies, well, money was actually largely decentralized in many different ways. So like, the production of money, storage of money, the way people verified money between one another, anybody could go create money. There would be some sort of commodity that, localized groups would share, and they would look into these things and whatever is most scarce to them within their regions. And people would store money on themselves. And, that's where things like treasure chests started coming from. And, people had hoards, or even before that, people would wear jewelry because it was much safer to keep money on you than to have it sitting somewhere in a hiding spot, or more practical at least. And, so a lot of that decentralized nature you can see with each evolution of our monetary systems over time, it started to centralize in different ways. And when you get to the side of banking, I kind of start that discussion in 17th century England. And at the beginning of all of it, people were storing a lot of their money in places like monasteries or, different government facilities. And there was this whole occurrence in England during the 17th century where, Charles I was appropriating wealth out of some of the money that people were storing in these government facilities that they had. So when that started to occur, we started to see more of a private emergence of a banking system in England. And people started to say, okay, well, I don't really trust having my money stored in like these monasteries that the government has access to, or any sort of their buildings. I am going to put my money somewhere else. And that system that kind of just voluntarily emerged was these goldsmith bankers. And that they were the guys who were smithing a lot of the gold that was being used in monetary form back then. So they had these large storage vaults. It was a very practical way for people to start storing the money. So they became these de facto banks. And they started creating these receipts that they would use for people. Rather than having to move gold around, they would give you a receipt that says, we have your money stored in a vault within our facilities. And this receipt entitles you to redeem that. And then a lot of, what happened with fractional reserve banking emerged out of that, where people started to realize, well, we don't, or the goldsmith bankers started to realize, that we don't have to keep all of that gold in here. I mean, it's a lot of it's just sitting here. What if we start lending some of that out? And then they started maintaining a fraction of their reserves and creating multiple claims on the same bar of gold. So there's a claim that you, the depositor, has on that gold. You want to get it out whenever you want. And then there was also a claim that these guys were giving out when they were lending it. And they'd give another person a receipt and they'd say, look, you're entitled to this. This receipt is being considered money within our economy, and you can pull that gold out whenever you want. And so it's interesting because there's a bit of debate around, how people defined government's role in all of this and how the Bank of England ultimately emerged. And, a lot of the details of that I kind of get into in the book, but I think that what's important is that we also saw the government borrowing from these goldsmith bankers, and the government ultimately ended up defaulting to these bankers. And the Bank of England was created for a variety of forms. It was created to finance a war with Napoleon, against Napoleon. And, but it was also created to pay back these debts to the goldsmith bankers. And that's when the very first form of fiat in our modern banking systems, which are kind of predicated upon England, that's when that first experience emerged. They created the Bank of England. They said, we're going to create this legal tender. We're going to print this paper, and we're going to pay off our debts with it. And that was immediately rejected by the market. And they subsequently went back to a gold standard. People are like, why in the world would we trust you with paper money? We want gold. And then, back to your point, there's kind of this pattern that I go into that we see throughout history. I take a look at the Bank of England, I take a look at the Bank of France, I look at Sweden a bit, and then I get into the US in a bit more detailed. And you can kind of see how most of the time when we saw pure fiat currency being created, it was for some sort of need to finance an excessive government expenditure where they couldn't tax people to get that. And that was typically war, pretty much always. And they go to war, they create a form of fiat, they print it endlessly, they destroy the credibility of their monetary good when they get off the gold standard. And there's a lot of gold and wealth gets lost and flows out of the country during these periods of time. And we see, typically that results in there are runs on banks, there's hyperinflation, governments always responded with price controls. And then what you see time and time again is there was some sort of societal uprising and ultimately some sort of regime change that occurs. So it's either things really totally crumble and a new government gets put in, or there's a very significant change to the government that happens after that. And so rounding this all out, back to your point, we're witnessing that happening in modern times again. We see a very similar pattern that's emerging in this fiat system, and this fiat system has been around for 50 years, and that's an average lifespan of a lot of modern fiat systems. And here come the price controls, and I was tweeting this I think it was a month ago or something when a lot of this talk started first popping up. But it's this is a pattern in history. It's to be expected, and we're kind of just witnessing this whole monetary revolution happen right in front of us right now.
Yeah, and you keep touching on something that I do want to dive into, which is I don't want to say necessity, but that's the only word I can think of right now. But the necessity of these banks being created throughout these iterations of history, it seems like they are almost always directly linked back to some sort of war going on. We saw it with this country when Lincoln was in the middle of the Civil War and they pushed through banking legislation. Then we saw it with Andrew Jackson and the craziness of that bank. We saw it with the Napoleonic Wars as well. So in an era now, I'm going to call it peace, because for the first time in modern history in America, at least, we're not in a formal war in theory.
Yeah.
In theory and on paper. So because we are not in this war state at this moment, like what do you see as a potential avenue to exit said fiat system? Could it be as simple as let's go back to having something back our currency, or would it be an uprising causing a complete demolition, demise of the system we have? And we will dive in, I think, a little bit more on the creation of the Fed in particular, but I want to start.
Yeah. This is I feel like this is definitely like the most popular question I always get. And it's incredibly speculative. It's very hard to say. We're subject to a very different regime today. We're subject to a different modern economy. So like when we draw on history, I think when you look at it like a bird's eye view, we can be like, yeah, eventually there's going to be some sort of regime change. And then what does that actually look like? I think that what we're witnessing is, so the idea is basically that every time we get to these hyperinflationary environments, I don't think that we're at like hyperinflation yet. And I think that we're seeing more of like a short-term pattern of it here. I think that the whole idea of like hyper Bitcoinization and all of that is probably a bit further down the line. But what you typically see in economies is, for when a hyperinflationary environment occurs, is there is a fixed asset that ultimately liability. So like background, like when I say liability, our money today is, from an accounting standpoint, a liability. It's debt. It's all backed by debt. And you kind of got to get into the details of the banking system to like understand that. But when we create debt, when the government issues treasuries, when banks issue different forms of debt, that is an expansion of the money supply. So our money has been tied to credit directly. And you can see that in like charts. If you were to look at like government debt expansion, you can see like, monetary expansion is commensurate with that. And that's how money works today. So like whenever we create this liability, and we've effectively created a system where that liability doesn't have to be paid back into any sort of fixed asset, which is formally on like the gold standard, that's what it would be. But because we don't have that anymore, the idea is like, well, where does the hyperinflation come? And that's why we're all here, is because we believe that there's an emergent private monetary good that people are voluntarily opting into, that I believe at some point in the not so distant future, it's going to have to be paid back into. So how does that happen? And I talk about this a lot in the book, but the adoption of Bitcoin is the key question. And once it reaches a certain critical mass of scale, is when it's going to get that medium of exchange status, and it's going to be something that a lot of people are ultimately settling their any sort of transactions in. So the economies that are furthest removed from our financial system are the first to go. And, it was interesting. I published my book in June, and then it was, I think 4 weeks later was when the El Salvador news popped up. And it's just a perfect case study. And it's exactly what we're looking at. We started, we saw the Rio de Janeiro news pop up with the mayor, and Panama is considering it. There's talks about a variety of other South American and even like African economies that are looking into these things. And it's all of these economies that are very far removed from our financial system that benefit the most from adopting an alternative to our current financial system. So and that all ties into having an understanding of how the US dollar exists as a global reserve, and the amount of power that we get in our economy from being a global reserve. And it's not all just the US wins and they don't lose. They do lose. It's just a question of who in the US loses. And there's effectively what happens is that when the US became the global reserve, and I make an argument for my book that at any given point in time, there's this trade-off that the people who control our monetary policy are considering. And domestically, we're looking at this trade-off between, okay, if we lower interest rates enough and we provide expansionary policy, how is that going to be expanding our economy? And our trade-off domestically is, well, we have too high of inflation. But there's another key piece that they're also being they're being effectively limited by. And that's similar to inflation, tied to inflation. But the idea is if we do that and we depreciate the value of our currency enough, then we are slowly eroding the idea that we should be a global monetary reserve. And the reason is that 80% of foreign transactions are denominated in US dollars, and US dollars exist as about 60% of global reserves. So with all of that existing out there, any sort of devaluation of the dollar affects a lot of these broader economies as well. And a lot of these economies are competing for US dollars because of how contracts are denominated. And, that kind of goes back into the petrodollar system. But so when you have this competition, this means that the US gets to print money. We get to create something. Well, we get to create nothing. We don't create any sort of good or service that people value. And we get to trade that with foreign economies for things that have products and services that do have value. So we get to trade nothing for something. And that's a very powerful position to be in. And that's the primary advantage of being a global reserve in the US dollar. But the trade-off that we have to deal with is, it comes in a variety of different ways. But like one good example is like the labor-intensive economies, the countries with very large populations, like China and India. All of our labor is pretty much outsourced to them. Not all, but a lot of our labor is pretty much outsourced to them. And they are exporting that labor. And when they're competing against one another for US dollars, they can get more dollars if their labor prices are cheaper because it makes them more competitive. So we see this like global artificial suppression of a lot of wage labor in these foreign economies, which is why all of our domestic companies are outsourcing labor to them, because we're like, okay, well, we can get a lot cheaper labor abroad. Might as well do that. So what happens? Well, companies get cheaper labor, and that makes them more profitable. And the blue collar class and the middle class of the US get screwed because they have a hard time finding jobs in these different areas. And they don't have the skill sets to be competing in other areas of our economy, because we've just in a very short amount of time kind of like obstructed this whole area of our labor class that people had, until recent history always anticipated wouldn't be going away very rapidly, and it has. And they haven't had time to invest in new skills that are demanded domestically. So that's one of the key issues. And when you see that amount of power that we have as a global reserve and how that impacts negatively some of these foreign economies, it's like, do they want to be competing over dollars? Not really, but that's just the way the system's been set up, and they have to play into it. And when you consider when Bitcoin steps in, it's like, well, I'm an economy, I'm operating on the dollar, they're devaluing it. I have an alternative system that I could be opting into that would increase wealth for our economy. It would attract investment. It's going to be stable, but stable in the long term. But the trade-off is they're effectively tying themselves back to this whole like gold standard idea, which compared to being bullied by the US economically is a good trade-off to make right now. And the question in the long term is like, okay, so we start to see a lot of these economies that have had a history of devaluing their, sovereign currencies. They're going to adopt Bitcoin as a reserve. They're going to gain capital. Once they can attract enough capital into their economy, are they going to start issuing their own forms of not pure fiat money, but money that's backed by Bitcoin? And are they going to take advantage of that system and keep lowering their reserves like we saw in history? And I think that there's a high likelihood that that will happen in a lot of different economies. But you will never be able to print more Bitcoin. So capital will ultimately start flowing into economies that have that are most considerate of that trade-off and that are not trying to devalue the wealth of their citizens through some sort of sovereign regime. So it's going to take a lot of power away from governments in the situation, because they're going to be held to a standard again. And the reason that they're going to be forcibly held to that standard as opposed to gold is that Bitcoin is digital and gold is physical. So we can move Bitcoin wherever we want permissionlessly. So people can always opt into Bitcoin and say, screw this, whatever government system that's been set up to make things more practical for us, we're going to be opting into this now. And that is a key piece of the game theory that I think is going to have that, gradually then suddenly effect and keep a lot of these, our public leaders who should be public servants more in the category of servants in the future. So to round that all out, I see some sort of system emerging with that group of incentives. And And ultimately, you know, how long that's going to take is it's hard to say. Like we have a very the situation that with the petrodollar is very entrenched, and that will take a long time to be uplifted. And but I think that the pure incentive that having a good monetary system is going to attract capital to economies, is going to get us to scale pretty rapidly on the Bitcoin network. And as we have more utility and more financial services and products develop in this ecosystem, so that larger, bigger actors and, you know, very serious capital allocators within the world can seriously operate independently within the system. Once we get to that level, then I think is when things start to get very, very rapid. So I don't know, it's about as like detailed as I can really get, but it's a huge question and nobody knows the answer to it. And
no, of course, it's purely speculative, and I appreciate you tackling that. I do want to unpack a couple of the things that you brought up. Firstly, like Alex and I were just talking about this before we had you on, about, you know, who stands to lose the most by going over to a Bitcoin standard. And it's those closest to the monetary system. Like you mentioned, I was already a fan of your writing and the book before I got to this, but like my parents are Iranian immigrants. And then you're highlighting the fact that like Iran is the perfect example of a country that, dude, you leave America and you go watch the news outside of America, the global powers of the world are the US, China, Russia, Iran. It's only just in the US and US news that doesn't portray Iran as such. And because Iran has been on the outskirts of our fiat system for so long, like I bang that drum of please let us go down that path. They have such bad inflation at this moment. Last I checked, it was already over 30%. But again, we don't talk about Iran in this country, so we don't even see, feel, or know about that type of stuff going on.
Right.
Secondly, you also kind of brought up in the book specifically, you know, the raising of interest rates and sort of the dichotomy of, does this help us being the US if we do this, or does it help sort of the international people who rely on our monetary system as their backing? And like this balancing act was what led to, like, I don't think you, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you actually suggested this in the book. I personally just kind of concluded this, but like there's definitely some sort of malicious intent at a certain point in the 20s and 30s when the US quickly realized like the British pound is on its last legs, and there is a way for us to almost supersede them if this is done methodically and carefully. It's never suggested in your book, but like frankly, like I love to believe stuff like that, because I do think that like when you have 6 of the most powerful people meet not even 30 years ago to design and implement a new financial system for the world, and then a new opportunity arises within a lifetime for them to now turn around and say, oh, this financial system that we've developed in-house can become the global financial system if we just sort of pull on this one thread at the right pace at the right time. Everyone has to come to us. And then we bore witness to that with Bretton Woods, and then whatever decisions Nixon thought were right or wrong led to where we are today.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. So like it kind of goes back to my point around the trade-off between domestic and international interests that as a central bank that you have to face. And that's that, and it's called the Triffin Dilemma. But the idea is that, so if you are a central bank and you decrease interest rates, that you know, that increases lending in the economy, and that's expansionary to your economic activity. But it's bad for you internationally because gold starts to leave the country. And what that means is that there's a lot of capital allocators when they're considering what they're going to do or where they're going to borrow. Well, you want to borrow from a place that has the lowest interest rates. So if you are an economy and you're lowering your interest rates, then people are going to borrow from you much more frequently. And then they take that, what they're borrowing, and they invest that capital somewhere else where they're going to get a higher interest rate for it. And that applies to gold, particularly in this situation during this period of like the 20s and 30s, is gold starts to leave the country because people start to actually borrow that physical gold, and then they take it and they would invest it into economies with a higher interest rate. So that devalues your economy, and you start to have a gold shortage, and your idea of, you know, this concept of who's the dominant monetary authority, who has the strongest currency, starts to depreciate. And then the alternative is true if you increase interest rates. If you increase, it's bad for you domestically because you start to contract all this credit that you've created, and then your economic activity starts to slow. But it's good because gold starts to come back into your country. You're a higher interest rate country. People want to invest more, and that benefits you as well in terms of your monetary dominance. So I think when you look at the Great Depression, the consensus among economists is that the Great Depression was somewhat of a phenomenon, and it's not totally like explainable. But a big thing that we know that was bad is the gold standard, because if we didn't have a gold standard, then we wouldn't have to deal with this trade-off. And that's just I think that just really retards the whole idea of what the purpose of a standard is. The purpose is, like, you can get rid of, and I make this point in the book, but like, you can get rid of your diet, and you may not break your diet if you don't have a diet, but you'll still get fat. And that's the whole point, is that you're still going to get fat. And like what we're seeing right now is that we've gotten very fat. And I think that when we go back to the periods of the 20 through 30s, we had this huge run up in the economy through our monetary policy, and it was highly expansionary in the roaring 20s. And then we got to a point after the war when Europe, or England, was in a very poor economic situation, and they were losing international monetary dominance. And I think that a primary incentive for them to raise their interest rates, or for the US to raise interest rates, was that it would attract more gold, and it would effectively eclipse the monetary dominance of England back then. And I do agree with that. I think that there was a major incentive for that. These are complicated questions. There's quite a bit that is going on that's affecting a lot of these decisions. But from my perspective and from what I've read, I think that was probably a primary motivator for us raising interest rates. One of the most interesting things that I read, and a key thing about my book too, is a lot of people are skeptical of this narrative just because it's an emergent narrative, it's new. And of course, everybody will, like, at least if you get into the economics worlds of the academics, they're going to call it tinfoil hat type thinking. So I wanted
that is always welcome on this show.
Yeah. But it's like, when I was writing this book, I was like, okay, well, I want to make sure that I try to create the most, I believe in a lot of this narrative, and I don't believe, I wanted to present the facts of history that existed, the story that I wasn't told when I, got an undergraduate degree in finance and economics. And it's still crazy to me to this day how all of this stuff is overlooked when you go get education in undergrad. And but I wanted to present that side of the story, because that is the side of the story that other people aren't getting. But I wanted to do that from the perspective of using sources that aren't biased necessarily towards that type of thinking. So I sourced a lot of my information just directly from the Federal Reserve. And there's a lot of these like Federal Registrar papers that they'd have over the years. And I found a couple great ones. There's this guy, like, his name was Leland Krabbe. And he had a great history and this was, one of I can't remember which Federal Reserve Bank he was at, but this was, one of the guys who was running one of the Federal Reserve banks back in the 80s. And he goes through this history. And one of the most interesting observations that he called out was, so hold on, it was, Yeah. So I might be wrong on these numbers, but they're in my book. They're right in my book. But so there's a legal mandated reserve ratio that we had at that time of gold to US dollars that we need to have. And that was 35%. And before FDR was confiscating citizens from gold from citizens back then, and before we did this interest rate hike, it was at 51%. So we were well above like this mandated reserve ratio that we needed. And the fact that we ended up raising interest rates despite not even being close to breaking our mandated ratio on gold reserves, I think that that's very telling of what their incentives were. It wasn't about maintaining our reserve ratios. It was about trying to eclipse England in monetary dominance and being far superior to them. So I think that yeah, so I definitely think that there's a lot of motivations for why we would implement monetary policy historically as well as today that, you know, aren't really talked about in the primary media, but are kind of the primary motivators of, you know, why the Fed makes certain decisions.
Absolutely. And we have a little bit more than 5 minutes, and I want to actually, I promised Eastside Tony that at some point this would kind of get brought up. And I think if I remember the numbers correctly, we went from 51% when FDR started enacting that policy to then I believe it got up to 65%. But on the other side of that, if we do go to a point where there is not enough gold in the reserves in these type of systems, then all of a sudden everyone all at once is going in to redeem this ticket, if you will, saying like,
Yeah.
I'm entitled to a certain amount of gold. You brought up something, and again, I think this goes to how strong of a writer you are and how well written this is, where you essentially lead us to a point where you say without saying, like, this system of fractional reserve currency in particular is in essence a Ponzi scheme, because the last person who's holding their ticket with no redeemable gold just lost everything they have. And you're essentially left, there's no one's going to come bail you out because there's no more gold left. The fiat system is completely shattered because everyone went to go redeem what backed that fiat currency. And then all you're left with is worthless paper money, i.e. the Weimar Republic.
Yep. Yeah. And one thing that I think is important to talk about on that is that it's not that the whole idea of fractional reserve banking is inherently bad. I just talk about all the bad things because it's accepted as a form of monetary creation and the you know, one of the only ways to do it nowadays. But so I'm giving the other side of my book. But to round that all out, it's not that fractional reserve banking is inherently bad. It's the moral hazard that results from a system that rewards assuming risk in a fractional reserve system, which, you know, i.e. bailouts. And when we can do bailouts, and we, you know, are able to print currency and redistribute wealth to people who have assumed too much risk and have caused failing enterprises to happen. That's the moral hazard that we need to remove from the system. But, you know, in a future, I see a future where we do have gold or Bitcoin as a reserve, and we do have paper receipts that are being traded, or, you know, paper is, I'm using it more figuratively, but, you know, some form of money that derives its value from Bitcoin as a reserve, being traded around the globe. And there's going to be private institutions that I think are going to be issuing all of that, and they're going to live and die by their reputations. And as long as you can't get bailed out and there's nowhere for them to run and hide, and that when they fail, that will create, I think, a very efficient system that will work well for people. And that'll probably be existing in, you know, concurrently with, and they'll be utilizing things like the Lightning Network and stuff like that. I just think that a lot of people are like hyper against this whole idea of credit and fractional reserve when it does serve a primary function in our economy. How money can bring value forward in time, credit allows us to bring it from forward in time back to the present. So it's just an alternative function that needs to exist in some form, but it's probably going to be significantly less, and it's going to be used in a manner that I think is sustainable, in which people live and die by their reputations. And yeah.
No, absolutely. I think we've talked on this show ad nauseum about how against bailouts in general we are, regardless of what they do. Or what industry, who they help. I'm a firm believer that bailouts are, in essence, a form of corruption and incentivizes the centralized powers to help those that align with them instead of the public and helping the public good. Another thing that I think gets touched on in your book is you talk about how centralization is an inherent flaw in all of these previous financial systems, but there's another layer to that, I think, which was touched on in the Andrew Jackson incident, where it was the greed itself that really pushed forward the fraudulent activities, the fraudulent behaviors, and in turn led to the demise of that bank, rightfully so. But it really seemed as though it was greed that was motivating that banker. I'm blanking on that one banker's name.
Oh, Nicholas Biddle.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
And it felt like you could almost apply that logic to a lot of iterations in the past, where it was greed that motivated certain groups to like continue to push the bounds of how far can we take this money until finally the money collapsed. Do you think there is a balancing act that, at least for right now, with centralized fiat systems, those who have sort of their foot on the gas, if you will, have a duty to not be overly greedy? And this is going to have to be our last question, unfortunately. But
yeah, and I'm glad that we're ending on this one. So I think that this is something that I think is going to probably cause a big divide within the Bitcoin community over time. There are people that fundamentally believe that there is a moral imperative that needs to be maintained, and that greed is something to be avoided. I think that I take the other side on that. I operate my life around the assumption that everybody is inherently greedy, that society functions on individuals pursuing their self-interest, and that we need to understand that and build systems that reward good behavior, but knowing that people act that way. So when I think about like greed, it's just like, sure, like Nicholas Biddle, probably more greedier than the average guy, probably pretty power hungry, but it's amazing how a lot of people who maintain a narrative that they're good people can become bad people once they actually do get power and once they actually do get rewarded in certain ways. So it's not that I do think he was greedy, and I do think that was a problem. But I think that if you were to have taken Andrew Jackson and, turn the tables and put him in his shoes, that, who knows what Jackson would have done either. I like to believe Jackson was a pretty good guy though. So, but nonetheless, I think that it's really important to consider that the greed is bad, but we need to operate on the assumption that everybody is that way, and build systems and ideas, and not assume that people aren't that way. Because it's when we start assuming people aren't that way is when problems emerge, because that's typically, I don't think, the right assumption. Yeah.
For sure. Well, Eric, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm sorry that we're ending it now. We'll have to find a time to bring you back and continue this conversation. But in the meantime, be sure to check out Eric's book, The Seventh Principle of Bitcoin. And we'll post a link in the chat as well, and in the show notes, so that you guys can go ahead and check it out. I highly recommend. It was an absolute pleasure reading it and chatting with you, Eric. Thank you for joining us.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me on. It was a blast.
Yo, love listening to you too. We definitely have to have Eric back. Q, thanks for hosting that awesome episode of Bitcoin Book Club. Really excited for our guests next week. Should be pretty exciting, as they always are. Want to segue into an interview with Zebedee, the Zebedee team, and our producer Chris. But first, I want to take a minute to talk about the Bitcoin 2022 conference. And, Q can back me up on this. This is going to be probably the best investment of a little bit of capital outside of Bitcoin that you can make this year, because this is going to be the biggest networking event of the year. If you're interested in tech, you're interested in getting in at the ground floor of a startup, you're interested in just meeting people with ideas both like and unlike your own, there's going to be 35,000 plus people on Miami Beach, all looking to make things happen, all looking to grow their businesses. I can't tell you how many companies have started as a result of these Bitcoin conferences. So if you're looking to start one or join one, you need to get out there.
Or how many people got jobs in the Bitcoin industry by attending said conference?
Yeah, I got my first job in the industry from people looking to ramp up their business to prepare to, market to the conference. So there's definitely a lot of things that are happening now on this countdown. We got 77 days, but the tickets are going up in price, guys, and the discounts are ending fast. So you need to buy your tickets today. It's 21% off with promo code YTMAG. That's YTMAG. Check the description of this video on YouTube or Twitch and get 21% off. That's the biggest discount out there. It's going to end any day now. So go get your tickets today. If you guys get your tickets, we're going to make it rain Bitcoin in the comments. We're going to get you guys some Bitcoin through the Carrot app. And now we'll take a short break and we'll be back to talk with Zebedee. introduction, or you want me to drop off?
I got it. An introduction. We're live.
All right. Cool. All right, guys. Yeah. Chris and Christian both here to talk Zebedee, Bitcoin, and gaming. I'll just turn it over to you two. Can't wait to hear this discussion.
How's it going, Christian? So I have Christian here. He's the founder of Zebedee, and I'll let him describe his company, and then we'll just start breaking it down. And ultimately, how I didn't end up meeting Christian, but I met a lot of people at the Tab conference. So
nice.
How's it going, Christian?
Yeah, it's going great. Thanks for having me on. So as Chris said, I'm Christian. I'm a co-founder of Zebedee along with Andre Neves and Simon Cowell. Not the Simon Cowell from like X Factor, but an equally awesome Simon Cowell, I guess. So Zebedee is a Bitcoin gaming company that runs on the Lightning Network. And we basically, the idea is to bring open programmable money to game devs in a way that they can focus on the games, not have to worry about all the complexities around Bitcoin, Lightning, regulation, all those types of things.
Yeah, so I met Andre and Yuri and a couple other developers at the Tab conference. So that's the Atlanta Bitcoin conference back in November. That was actually before I even joined Bitcoin Magazine. So I was still a fiat pleb, kind of in the fiat world, looking to
leave. Conference to start it with, though.
Exactly. Yeah, I missed, unfortunately, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin conference in 2021, and also BitBlock Boom because of just personal commitments on my end. So it was really cool going to the Tab conference. It was a smaller conference. I think there was about 350, 400 people. But I will say, and this is no insult to any of the other companies that were there, but Zebedee really stole the show. I know Andre and Yuri, they brought a bunch of lights. They had like a gaming room, and it was like for someone who's a gamer and now runs the Twitch stream and the live stream for this. It was basically like heaven. You're walking in, all these people playing video games, and you're earning Bitcoin by doing so.
Yeah, it's such a simple but amazing thing to do. You know, like I've been to a lot of conferences, you know, and they're cool, but obviously there's not much to do with Bitcoin apart from just talk to people, maybe buy a beer. But if you just add Bitcoin gaming there, it really just gives the conference an extra dimension.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Bitcoiners, I think gamers are most susceptible to understanding magic internet money, as the meme alludes to, that, you know, Bitcoin is internet money and it's permissionless and it can go anywhere. I think a lot of people that are in the gaming space are more technical, not saying that there are people that aren't, but, you know, they're kind of the ones to experiment with new games, new ideas, whether it's a small indie game or whether it's, you know, a large platform game coming from Blizzard or Microsoft or Sony or as the such. So I guess, how did you found Zebedee? What made you decide to incorporate Bitcoin and payments and the Lightning Network into it?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I might just go a bit kind of how I got started in Bitcoin and gaming in general, because I actually started in 2013 with Bitcoin and gaming, and it was a lonely time there. It was basically just me and a few other people, but I was in kind of an indie game, app developer, living in Australia at the time, and I was making a simple game for myself. And then I came across Bitcoin just from a client. He wanted us to make a Bitcoin wallet. So I kind of didn't know anything about it, but it just seemed awesome that you could have programmable money. Because at the time, you know, you could do things with money. You could do like in-app purchases, but you couldn't really do what you wanted, right? It was, you know, you basically had to do what that API let you do, you know, and it was also quite a walled garden. So I just, like a lot of us do, we just want to combine Bitcoin with our hobbies in any way we can. I thought it'd be cool just to put this Bitcoin into my iOS game at the time. So the first thing I thought to do was I'll just let people purchase things in the game with Bitcoin. I got rejected by Apple because they didn't, especially back then, you're not allowed to do that. It's changing a bit now, but you're only allowed to accept in-app purchases. But I just really wanted to put Bitcoin in a game, you know, so just for fun, I just flipped it around and said, okay, well, if I'm not allowed to get Bitcoin from the player, I'll just give the player Bitcoin. And for some stupid reason, I decided to put my Bitcoin in the game, and anybody who downloaded it and played the game would just get Bitcoin sent to them. And I didn't know how long it would last. I posted a QR code on Reddit saying, hey, I've got this game approved on the App Store. It's a great tool to get people onboarded into Bitcoin. Just send Bitcoin to this address and it'll fund the game. And yeah, that kind of worked for quite a while, and that's how I kind of got into Bitcoin gaming. I did a bunch of other different games, and then eventually they all kind of stopped working because on-chain fees became expensive and things didn't scale. And at the time, a lot of my contemporaries went over to other chains which were promising, zero fees. They weren't promising it, but that was the impression. That was Ethereum. It's kind of funny that now that has the fee issue. But I realized that, well, there's no real solution to this that I can see. Like, another chain isn't going to solve it. It's just going to have the same issue if it gets popular. So I kind of, I just kind of tried batching and, tried a few different things. And then I heard about the Lightning Network. The founders gave a talk and the white paper came out. And I thought, yeah, that's cool. I'm sure that will come out soon and I can start to build on it. Skip forward like 4 or 5 years, and eventually it did come out. And this actually ties in with Bitcoin Magazine because I actually entered the Lightning Gaming Hackathon at Bitcoin 2019 in San Francisco. And I won that with some sample games I made with the Lightning Network. And then I met Simon Cowell in person, and that was kind of, the conference that helped form Zebedee, really.
That's incredible. That's an awesome start. It seems you've been in Bitcoin much longer than me or my host, Alex McShane. So I guess, what was it like in those early days? Like you said, it was kind of just you. Was there any other developers doing programming specifically with games, or was it just you at the time?
Oh, yeah, there were. So I think I was the first person, I would say, to probably try and get something on the App Store, just because it was quite difficult to get. Like, at the time when I started making it, Bitcoin was completely banned from the App Store. They didn't even allow wallets. But my job, I worked for an agency where we would just make apps for anybody who came through the door and had like 20 grand. So I was used to getting like terrible apps approved by the App Store. So I reckon I could get a Bitcoin game approved. Can I just tilt my camera down a smidge? Oh, I tried to do this a bit easier. So there was just me on mobile, but once it'd been out a while, a lot of other folks started to do it. I think in the early days, there was a lot of excitement and probably a bit of a disconnect. I think we didn't really understand the ins and outs of scaling. So, probably people who were more developer focused knew that this stuff wasn't really meant for applications. It was at that time. But as far as I was concerned and my contemporaries, we just, we kind of thought, well, this is great. We can put everything on the Bitcoin blockchain and there'll be no issues. And then I started to kind of notice it didn't really work when, I started to get a bit of hate on Reddit for spamming the blockchain, which I probably was. And to be honest, it got quite contentious. So there was a lot of angst in the community. A lot of this kind of goes into the whole scaling debate where, a lot of my contemporaries were firmly in the big block camp. And I was for a while, until I realized if my game could fill up this much block space, and it's not popular compared to like a real game, like a real game that's like, Clash of Clans or whatever's popular now is like orders of magnitude. Like, this stuff doesn't really scale. But yeah, I think it started off like a honeymoon period, but very fast. There was a lot of tension, and a lot of people kind of, understandably, a lot of people had raised money and started companies, and their companies were failing because of the on-chain fees. So that's kind of what it was like. Then, as I said before, a lot of people moved over to Ethereum was the main one at the time. That was the only other one, because again, they thought we can continue to develop games on this for zero fee on that chain. And then there was kind of a dark age of, I would say, Bitcoin gaming, where it was just me and like another guy, and everybody had left. And in a way, it was sad that, I suppose Bitcoin gaming kind of died on Bitcoin, but it was good because when the Lightning Network came out, I'm yet again an early adopter of it, and I have a first mover advantage at Zebedee. And now I'm starting to see some of the people who are getting, frustrated with fees on other chains. Once you showed them the Lightning Networks here, they kind of, didn't realize it was a thing, and actually we're starting to see them kind of trickle back over.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I guess I'll ask you this question. Do you think that Bitcoin right now is going through a similar adoption as the internet? You know, a lot of people say the running joke and a lot of the Bitcoin maximalists is that people say, oh, you know, there's another chain, it's faster, it's cheaper. Exactly to your point of saying like, oh, they're trying to put a whole game through the on chain or whatever it may be, the equivalent for another altcoin. But do you see it like the internet in terms of it's building in layers? Like, you know, there's kind of TCP and then you're kind of built on it. People always joke that when people are saying internet or Ethereum or another altcoin saying, oh, it's going to be the next Bitcoin. When other people are like, well, do you use internet 1, 2, 3, 4, 10? Like people are always making the joke that everyone uses the same internet. Why wouldn't we just use the same money? And it seems that in this day and age, I wasn't around for the ICOs, but it seems a lot more altcoins are coming out each and every day claiming that they're better for the environment. They're better for electricity. They're better for speed and such. Do you see Bitcoin going through that with currently Bitcoin's base chain, then the Lightning Network, and then probably even third or fourth or fifth tier layers being built on top of Bitcoin?
So I agree completely that Bitcoin scales in layers, and you can build stuff too early. For example, I think was it Blockbuster tried to make a Netflix when the internet came out, and it just wasn't going to work, right? So it's a good idea, just the wrong timing. To answer your question around other chains, like I've been in this space for a while, so I've seen chains come and go, right? I've seen there's a bunch of like chains which were going to be the gaming chain, and they all disappeared, and now we have ones which are the new gaming chain, which, you know, getting a lot of VC attention. Yeah, they might stick around, but it's you know, it's, I take it with a pinch of salt because I've seen so many come and go. I would say that I think Bitcoin in a way at the moment is really doing one thing only and one thing well, and that's payments. And a lot of these other people want other chains because they want to do things other than payments, like, you know, complicated smart contracts or DeFi or NFTs for example. And yeah, of it, like there are, you know, proposals, as you said, space chains or things on Bitcoin that, you know, could do the same thing, but they're not going to come out anytime soon. So in a way, I kind of don't, I understand when people are going to these other chains to do something, but I kind of feel that, you know, it's kind of a catch-22 situation. If you want to do something that's not possible on Bitcoin now, you can choose some of the other chains out there because that's your only choice. So you've got to choose something, but whatever you're going to choose is going to be wrong. That's kind of how investors see it. Like they don't want to be too late. Everybody's, you know, doing this stuff and they want to be early, but nothing is really quite there yet. Yeah, so it's one of those things, you know, like I was lucky that I was independent before, so I didn't really have any like backers or investors. It was just me because I was a programmer, so I can make all the games myself. So I could wait for the tech to come out, you know, like the Lightning Network. And that's kind of the approach I've taken to stuff like tokens and NFTs, because I did do a lot on that on Bitcoin with counterparty protocol. And my view is that, well, eventually that stuff will work in a more scalable way. But at the moment, I'm busy with Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. And then once we've got that stuff done, we can start to focus on tokens and stuff. While other people are trying to tackle it now in I would say, a little bit of, you know, it's a kind of hacky kind of way, you know. But having said that, I think there's a disconnect. I think a lot of Bitcoiners get angry when they see other chains complaining to be decentralized because they're not decentralized, and it's disingenuous for those chains to say they're decentralized when they don't actually need to be decentralized. A lot of what these chains are doing for games, such as certain NFTs, they actually don't need a blockchain, or they don't need to be decentralized for most of it. But they feel they need to say it's a blockchain in order to get investment. So I think that's the big thing we're going to see coming. I think in a few years, they're going to quietly discontinue themselves from the being decentralized, and I suppose be more openly centralized crypto solutions. And if that happens, it's really quite a different thing from Bitcoin then. I think at the moment now we tend to compare them, you know, like, well, this altcoin is trying to be a Bitcoin competitor because it's saying it declares it as decentralized, but ultimately that won't last. And I think we'll just have Bitcoin, which is decentralized, and a bunch of crypto services which do stuff with crypto in a centralized way, but it's kind of an honest way. So Bitcoiners don't mind because they're not lying about being better than Bitcoin. And those chains are happy because they can just scale without having to put on the decentralized facade. And then in the future, once the tech is there, we might have more actual decentralized solutions to do all these things that people might want to do with NFTs, such as space chains or things like that. But I think that's going to take a while. And in the short term, we're just going to have, more centralized but open, honest kind of solutions.
Yeah, and using history as a guide, I guess, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes is kind of the infamous quote.
Yeah,
I kind of what?
I think it was Mark Twain, was it?
Yeah, was it Mark Twain?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that is the quote. But he, I guess, going with comparing Bitcoin to the internet, you definitely, I hate saying this, I know I'm gonna get flack for this. I know a lot of Bitcoiners think this is the super cycle and this is where we're gonna advance or explode to new all-time highs, which I think will come in time. But I think with just so many countries or companies trying to look at cryptocurrencies in general and not Bitcoin, anyone that says they have a new crypto coming out, everyone tries to jump on it to pump and dump it and sell it. You can look at any of the social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or any of these platforms of people saying Dogecoins is going to, $6,000 or whatever, all these grandiose comparisons of what they're going to be. I think Bitcoin's going to go through a similar thing like the internet, where in 2000, any company that was saying, oh, we're doing internet things, pets.com was valued higher than Amazon ultimately before it crashed. When it crashes, the cryptocurrency market and Bitcoin will go down in price. Bitcoin will probably lead the charge to do so when it goes down and wipe out a lot of the bad projects. But I think Bitcoin will remain, and I think Bitcoiners will be very happy to pick up some cheap sats in the in the short term, and then for the long-term appreciation of it.
Yeah, well, again, like there's been a few of those cycles for me, right, when it's crashed and stuff, but each time it comes back stronger.
I completely agree. Yeah. And you're just looking at historically at the way Bitcoin does it, in 4-year cycles. I don't know if it's going to be as much 4-year cycles. This seems like a prolonged cycle, but we'll see. I guess time will only be the test of that. So I guess when you're scaling onto Lightning and stuff, I know when I was at the TAB conference, it was very cool seeing a lot of the games you have. I'm drawing a blank on it. I know one, it kind of looks like a Super Smash Bros. In the sense that you guys developed. One kind of looked like a Mario Kart. Yes. But I think when I really understood it and I understood the importance of what you guys are doing and how this is going to change the world is when we were playing CSGO or Counter-Strike Go.
That's our favorite.
Yeah, when you see Counter-Strike and that you're seeing that people are receiving Bitcoin in it, not that I have nothing against any of the smaller games. I think that's awesome. And, there's definitely a market for that. There's a gigantic market for that. But seeing it in a mainstream game that a lot of people know, I could definitely see how this can integrate so easily with Nintendo or, Microsoft or Sony or any of their games. Imagine playing Super Mario Party and you're trying to collect stars or coins, and those happen to be sats or Bitcoin. And I think that would be pretty ingenious. So I guess what's your business model for Zebedee aside from doing putting Bitcoin into games, and then how do you guys have your business model, if you don't mind sharing?
So when we formed the company, we took a decision not to be a game developer studio, just because I've been in the space. I know how hard it is to make a game, and I've seen so many terrible blockchain games. People kind of do that, especially like in the blockchain space. They'll make a token, sell it, and they'll then fund development of like block fighters. And it's an okay game, but it doesn't stand up to like the popular AAA games. But at Zebedee, we had the issue. Well, when we first started, there was no games for anybody to play, right? We haven't got any developers on board or building with us. So we had two choices. One was to make our own internal games, which are the sample games, the Smash Brothers style game you mentioned. Or could we add Bitcoin to a game that people already love? So we chose to do that to CSGO, and that was great because we can then go to AAA games studios and actually show them a AAA game which has Bitcoin integrated into it, so they can actually, they can actually see it. Well, wow, and we can show that once we added Bitcoin to it, like people are playing it more, those studios will then say, oh, okay, well, if it works for Counter-Strike, why won't it work for Call of Duty? So we can get those conversations started. To answer your question on our business model, it's quite simple, really. We basically just take a small percentage of the fees, a fee of the transactions that go between players, but the amounts are very, very low. So with in-app purchases, if a game dev makes a purchase, Apple will take something like 30%. But we do nano transactions, as we call them. So we have games that do hundreds of thousands of transactions, and they're in the small amounts, maybe 1 cent, 10 cents each, and we just take 1% of that, or a couple of percent. And because we have millions of transactions, and the aim is to have billions of transactions, that all adds up. So that's the main business model. It's simple. Developers don't mind because it's crazy low compared to any other payment rails out there. And the users don't notice it because it's such a small amount, and everyone's happy. And it's just a great simple model that works. So that's the main business model. There could be other ones that open up as well, going, such to, for example, offer non-ramps to fiat, stuff like that. And also something that's interesting, it's not our main business model, but it could be interesting to see the routing fees we take on our Lightning nodes, because we're going to have the most active Lightning nodes on the network once we get these, for example, large games on our platform that are doing, millions of transactions each. So that's going to be interesting to see. But it's hard to kind of predict that, because we're kind of, we're on the vanguard of actually doing that, and it's kind of a new thing, but that's going to be exciting to see.
For sure. And I know Guy Swan, I was listening to one of his episodes, I think back in September, October timeframe, and it was an argument for basically keeping the Lightning Network for transactions only. So basically transferring money. And I know this is kind of a hotbed topic, because a lot of Bitcoiners see, if you're telling someone what to do with their Bitcoin or with their sats, is it really Bitcoin at that point? But I know a lot of people are getting frustrated with basically routing messages with like Sphinx chat, or if like we start building that, you're sending videos across the Lightning Network, and that bogs up the channels. So I can no longer send you 5 sats or 20 sats or whatever it may be, because other things are getting routed through. I guess one of the counters was the Lightning nodes that have the liquidity could set requirements that they're not going to process this much data. If it's above this amount, I'm not processing it. I'm only processing low amounts of data, which keep it more restricted to payments. If you want to do higher amounts, you'd have to find a node that would offer, or that would accept basically taking all that data packets through their node, and obviously being compensated for such.
Yeah, I think so. This is kind of exactly what I saw with on-chain when I was doing games, and even tokens on Counterparty. We're basically using Bitcoin for stuff that wasn't Bitcoin, putting data in there. And the developers, the people tried to kind of stop it. Luke Dash Jr. famously wouldn't relay anything that had an op return in there or something. Again, with the Lightning Network, I see the same thing happening. I'm kind of sympathetic to both views. I kind of agree that they need to focus on what they do. It's hard, like if you make something a general purpose thing, it kind of leads to all sorts of issues around security and scalability. But then I kind of feel sympathetic for developers who try to build apps on Bitcoin and were told no, wait for layer 2, and then layer 2's come out and they've been told no, this is just for payments again. I guess what I would say is I thought is a way for nodes just to ignore that traffic, and nodes who want to do it can do it. But there's ways to hide data so a node wouldn't tell if it's a payment or not. So probably on the Lightning Network, fees will probably become a thing. They'll probably be, I think they have to be more expensive than they are now generally on the network. Of course, if you just have like a single channel, for example, if you're a game developer, you have a direct channel to Zebedee, and we have a direct channel to a user, then we can kind of keep those fees virtually zero or a lot lower. But fees will probably just have to get to a point where it stops some of the kind of, I guess, not spam, I suppose, or but also isn't too high that it would stop regular payments. I think when stuff like maybe space chains or drive chains or whatever, they come out, that might just take a lot of the pressure off, and people will probably prefer to do it there, just because the Lightning Network is still it's limited to what you can do. But I'd imagine on something like a side chain or a space chain, you could do a lot more, because it's just, you can kind of do whatever you want. And then there's obviously, there's stuff like simplicity and all this stuff. So I guess using my experience, I would tell developers, like, sometimes it is better just to wait for the right tech to come out rather than trying to build it, too soon. But we'll see what happens. Like, it's permissionless, so people are going to do it, and yeah, all we can do is kind of raise fees and try to, yeah.
I think that's awesome. I know. So I guess what's next for Zebedee in terms of, I guess you guys, I don't want to say you guys are cutting out the middleman, but you guys are, in a sense, because I know we're very privileged here in the United States. I think you said you're calling from the UK, not to dox you too much, but a lot of, like,
tell from my accent, maybe.
Yeah. But I know, so Visa and MasterCard are kind of, they seem to be the ones that are holding the power, the keys, basically. In doing so, I know that they charge, in at least the Western world or a lot of the G7 nations, it seems to be that their percentage that they take is anywhere from 1.5% to 3% for transactions. And a lot of times us as consumers that use credit cards don't necessarily see that. Normally it shows up that the vendor has to eat the fee, but in doing so, they'll just raise their prices the 1.5% to 3%, and then they push it back on the customer. Ultimately, you guys are trying to cut out the Visa and MasterCards and do it at fractions of a cost by comparison. So do you see, I guess not, do you see competition from Visa and MasterCard coming into the same realm? And I guess how would you compete against them?
Not particularly, just because, unless they start to get into the Lightning Network, then we'd maybe be concerned. But in a way, that could be good for the Lightning Network in general. But again, it goes back to having an open programmable money, the one that is permission. So I get this question a lot, especially from game developers, like, why do I need to use Bitcoin? Why can't I just use, like, dollars or euros or pounds? And I think with Bitcoin, if we use the Lightning Network, you are linked to the ever-growing ecosystem. So if I use MasterCard or Visa and I get some pounds, I can't just use that pounds in a game easily, but what we see with Zebedee is one example, a kind of funny example, is that people would play our games at a conference and they get some Bitcoin to their Lightning wallet. It could be our Lightning wallet or it could be another Lightning wallet. So the user already has a choice of what wallet they want to use, but they still get the same Bitcoin, and then they can use that in another game which is made by a different developer, or they can go to El Salvador and use it at the McDonald's there, or they can use it to feed chickens on Polyfeed. And the more apps that are added and use cases that are added to the ecosystem, it makes the sats and the Bitcoin you get even more functional. Where obviously with pounds, you can convert it and you could send it via bank transfer, but you just don't have the, zap. It's their kind of frictionless thing, and they probably won't have it unless, maybe MasterCard might get into some sort of stable coin, for example, perhaps, and everybody accepts Tether. But I just think you then have other issues you get into, for example, like single points of failure, and also that's going to be quite regulated. So not really concerned about that. I think just the open source nature of Bitcoin means that in the long term we'll outcompete on features and usability, and that's what we've seen in tech for a while, right? Like VHS versus Betamax, or all these kind of closed ecosystems, intranets versus internet. On the long term horizon, the open source solutions win because it's more free, it's easy to use, and there's more things that you can do with it.
Definitely. So I guess I had someone in the chat that keeps yelling that we've on YouTube at least that we have to talk about Minecraft. So I guess they're talking about, do you have plans to expand to putting your games on Minecraft? I guess I know the reason that you guys use Counter-Strike because it's an open source game. I believe it was an addition or a change to Gary's mod. Is that right? Or is that Half-Life? Am I conflating the two?
Counter-Strike was a fork of Half-Life originally, I believe. And like Half-Life was from, I think everything came from like the Quake Doom engine or Doom engine originally.
Yeah,
it's interesting tree, but yeah, actually Counter-Strike wasn't open source. Originally, I was going to do it with Quake because that's what I played growing up, and I heard Quake was open source, so I actually went to get the source code of Quake, which is open source, but only the source code is open source. The assets and the name weren't open source, so you basically have a game with no characters, and you have to make new skins. And then somebody pointed out that like Counter-Strike is more popular than Quake, but yeah, it's not that Counter-Strike was open source. It's just that Counter-Strike, it lets you run your own server and you can do mods and plugins. That's the key thing, so you know, obviously we don't know exactly how the source code works. Well, we kind of have a good idea, but we can write a mod or a plugin which puts a Bitcoin in the game, right? That's somebody can go and pick up and get some stats. To answer your question, yeah, we have looked at other games as well. So there's so many games that people want, whether it's like Dota or Minecraft. There's no short-term plans to do it. We kind of because like I said before, we are, our main business model are making the tools for developers to build games. So that's kind of what we're focused on at the moment, and we're working with some really cool studios to bring out who are working on some awesome games that I can't talk about. So we're focusing on that. But I would say if anybody out there has some Minecrafting modding skills and they want to focus on that, hit us up and we can, give you access to our tools and SDK, and you can use the Zebedee SDK to add Bitcoin to Minecraft or any other game. So that's what I'd say.
That's incredible. Yeah. So I guess not that your company runs into roadblocks, but I guess it does for a lot of the LP or the IP of companies that hold basically the rights to the game. Like, I guess we would all love to see it plug into Nintendo or Microsoft or Sony, but obviously they hold the rights to the game. So I guess when you guys go to them, do you show or do you pitch like, hey, it works on all these games? Maybe, cutting out the middleman such as Visa or MasterCard would be a good idea, that they can recoup even more fees. They pay you a smaller percentage than they're paying Visa and MasterCard, and just kind of showing them the benefits of an open and open interoperable monetary system.
Yeah, so we have spoken to some large studios, some kind of household names, and it's kind of good and bad. So the good is like people are really excited about this, and they get it and they want to innovate, and everybody's thinking like, what's the next thing in gaming? We kind of had VR, but what's the next thing we can do? Is like cloud gaming. So they're very interested in Bitcoin. But a lot of these game companies, they won't risk it on their AAA titles just yet. So what they actually, a lot of these AAA companies, they actually secretly have smaller studios which aren't really publicly known that they're associated with smaller games, and they kind of try it in those games first, and once they start to work in those games, then they'll kind of slowly build up to their bigger IPs. And at the moment there is a lot of like FUD about, for example, Bitcoin and green energy. So that is something we need to tackle as a community, because there's not even with Bitcoin, but just say NFTs in general. Like if a game company announces they're doing stuff with crypto, a lot of gamers don't like it because they start to say it's harming the planet. So that is something we need to focus on. But I think that'll pass. It obviously started with it's for terrorists, and then it's for this, and now the current thing is it's not green. But I think there's an active, like Jack Dorsey and Square Crypto are going to be working on some PR and greening mine stuff. So I think that'll pass. I think once that has passed, we'll start to see them coming on board. And once they've tried it in their smaller titles, and I know it works. So we've tried it on. See, it's like every game we put Bitcoin into, it's just increased the retention rate and increase the number of players, and it's really easy. We had a game that it's a mobile game, a hyper casual game, but they added Bitcoin to their game in like a week with our API.
That's funny.
So
Yeah, no, Christian, there's a great way to counter hecklers. I actually orange pilled a heckler. So I was streaming. I'm the Twitch project manager, as well as the live stream producer. And the way that I did that is someone came in while I was streaming on Twitch one of the mornings a couple weeks ago, and they're like, I hate Bitcoin, because our name is, the Bitcoin handle on Twitch. Yeah. And they were like, I hate Bitcoin. It's horrible. It's so bad for the environment. You guys are jacking up the price of all the GPUs. Yeah. I can't get a graphics card. I'm like, no. That's not Bitcoin. That's Ethereum and all other altcoins. He's like, wait, really? I was like, yeah, it's unprofitable to mine using a GPU for Bitcoin. They're using ASICs. So I said that to him, and then he's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, Bitcoin's a good thing. And so I converted this guy that was a heckler into now a Bitcoiner, at least, tolerable or liking it. So one step at a time.
I think also telling people that the Lightning Network is like the most green way to use Bitcoin, because, if you think that one Bitcoin transaction burns X amount of carbon, then instead of doing one Bitcoin transaction with the Lightning Network for the same amount of carbon, you can do a million transactions, because obviously it's just the transaction to open the channel. So in a way, this is the carb pooling of Bitcoin in a way, but the carb pooling on steroids or something. So that's something I think people don't realize. So yeah, I think it's all about education and just getting people knowing. I think FUD eventually wears itself out, and we'll start to see real growth. So like, we have great stories. Like, I have a lot of people who kind of say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why would I do this? Or, Bitcoin is like, is it true that like it's uneven and unequal? And then I'll show like a tweet from, we had a player of this Counter-Strike CSGO from South America who was like, young kid, and he uploaded this picture that he's managed to pay his rent on time now because he earned Bitcoin on with Zebedee on CSGO, and he's helped his dad pay off his debts, and all these kind of stories, and like he's earning more than he could get at a job, but he can't find a job. So I think those are the stories we need to promote more, and they're out there.
I completely agree. And, like I said, you and I come from G7 nations, or nations with like kind of booming economies. But, you look at the El Salvadors, you look at the Argentinas of the world, the Greeces, the Venezuela, the list goes on and on. And, us coming from countries that typically export our currencies, or at least the US dollar does, because it's the way that we denominate energy or barrels of oil. We're very privileged to be in the situation that we're in, having strong currencies relative to the weak ones of these countries, where they see extreme hyperinflation of 15, 20, 30, 50% per month over month. And Bitcoin's a great equalizer. President Bukele is very smart in the way that, he's adopting Bitcoin to help his people. I know many Bitcoin maxis are very wary about him. And, I agree with their sentiment of kind of always being cautiously.
Don't trust verify, right?
Yeah, being cautiously optimistic about any politicians. A lot of Bitcoiners love Senator Lummis, and I'm in that camp as well. But I'm just kind of cautiously optimistic is the way that I look at it for any one of them. I still think it's good to support them. I heard an argument by a Bitcoin mechanic on Adam Meister's podcast recently saying that he hates when politicians or countries or other things are adopting it. He has the counter argument for that. He says that Bitcoin thrives when countries are trying to ban it, when they're trying to make it more difficult to use. That's really when it shows its resiliency, and that's really when it gains its trust or trustless network, or don't trust verify, and that it really works. Nigeria, when they banned it, they saw an increase on black market Bitcoin, went up like basically 25% of the cost that you could normally buy on if it was a regulated exchange. So I think Bitcoin's here to stay. I think you're in the same camp. What do you see next for Zebedee, or what are you guys trying to do next? And what limits you guys to only games and not to be a payment processor for anything, for plugging it in for anything?
Yeah, well, we're just basically growing this year. We're going to double our staff, and there's so much stuff we need to build. A lot of the stuff that we are focusing on is because if we want the larger game studios, and I think the best way to kind of orange pill people is to get them earning Bitcoin in games, especially when they're seeing inflation, right? A lot of young people don't really know what inflation is until now. So if we can orange pill them through these huge games, that would be a win for Bitcoin. However, these games aren't really going to touch Bitcoin until they're happy that, about the, the various regulations and licenses. So we kind of are focusing on covering that for game developers. So if you're a game developer and you want to use Bitcoin, if you use it through Zebedee, you don't have to worry about any, legal issues. We have, probably best to get me back on once they're more public, but we have some like cool games studios who are actively building with us now. So it takes a bit of time to make a game, but later on this year they're going to be released. We got the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire IP building a game on mobile. I think it's actually out on mobile. It's a casual game, but yeah. So I just say we're growing and we're onboarding game devs, and we're going to have awesome games coming out. Answer your second question, yeah. We thought about this when we co-founded the company, and we just thought, I think as a new company to kind of take on the huge giants of payments, it's quite a big challenge. So it probably makes sense just to focus on something smaller as the way in. And gaming is something that is being neglected with Bitcoin. A lot of other companies are trying to do for general payments, but in a way it's starting to take off, but general payments hasn't really taken off too much because people don't like to spend their Bitcoin. But with gaming, we can actually get the, target the play to earn market and also the competitive play. So it actually gives, it's a great way for people to just get Bitcoin through games, which if we were doing general payments, it feels a bit more like we're kind of taking on the Bitcoin coffee market, which is cool. But yeah, I think gaming is where and I can't speak for the other co-founders, but because they had their own reasons, but I was a game developer, so that's one of the reasons why I did it. But we're focused on gaming. In the future, who knows? I think gaming is merging into the real economy. So we have a distinction now, less and less so, between games and general payments. But I think that in a few years, it's going to be somewhat the same thing, right? So you might, your consumer shopping could be in a game, and it's not really just a game to you. It's actually part of your social life, for better or for worse. So yeah, we kind of think at Zebedee that the virtual economy at some point, is going to overtake the physical bricks and mortar economy, and it's probably majority going to be in gaming. We've seen like the gaming industry is already worth more than the movie and the music industry, and it's just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible. That kind of sounds like a dystopian nightmare for me. If we're all plugged in and doing our own thing. I guess I'll let you give your take on that.
You can see behind me, like I've actually got like an acoustic piano there, and I've got guitars. So yeah, I'm not big on the metaverse as a place we'll live, but I'm big on the metaverse as a place we'll visit. Did that make sense? So I see games as, obviously people can get addicted to them, but I think it's all about having a healthy balance. And one of the things that motivates me is that a lot of people play games all the time, and maybe too much, and they don't actually get anything for it. They might get pleasure, but they're not really financially improving themselves. But adding Bitcoin and real money to games could actually just make games, being in a game, a bit less, what's the word? I don't want to sound derogative here, but a bit more meaningful and a bit more important. And yeah, so I agree with you. Like I don't want to live in like a Ready Player One style world, but I think it would be a cool place to visit now and then and earn some Bitcoin in.
Yeah, I forget what year it was. I think it was either 2011 or 2012. There was it was StarCraft. I think they had a StarCraft tournament, and it was in South Korea, and the winner won like, I think maybe 10 grand or 25 grand. And then places 2 through 6, they were teams. They won 25 Bitcoin. I think it was 4-person teams. So each person got like 6.25 Bitcoin. And, you'd love to see if they just held on, or if they sold it once it went up, or if they sold it when it went down, or, kind of see any of the players that held on.
If they didn't lose it and found it later, they would have sold it. That's the thing, right? I think the best people are the people who lost it and then found it, but we've had the similar thing at Zebedee, actually. So when Zebedee started, 2019, the price was lower, and we had tournaments where we were giving away, big chunks of Bitcoin. In my early games in 2013, I was giving away, 0.1 Bitcoin now and then, the kind of stuff like that, right? So it all adds up. But that could happen with sats now. We have games where people are just getting few thousand sats a day, for example, or even more with Counter-Strike, and who knows, that could be worth something insane in 10-20 years, or it will be worth to the moon. Should state that it's going to happen.
Definitely.
Number go up.
Yeah, don't give away your Bitcoin to anyone. I'm always trying to earn it. I'm not trying to lose any. Yeah, I've sent it to people to show how it works and stuff like that, to try and orange pill people. I know even Alex, or my host, was bringing this up before. I heard in the early days, maybe you're familiar with this, back in the Reddit days, it was actually frowned upon to hold your Bitcoin. It was called hoarding, and people were like against it. I don't know if that predates you, but there was a lot of people.
A little bit. I remember, so I was actually when I got into Bitcoin, I was actually living in Tokyo, and there was a Bitcoin meetup there, was run by Roger Ver, and it was very much about using Bitcoin. So Roger Ver, to his credit, actually, he basically got like so many restaurants and bars in Tokyo accepting Bitcoin. So when we went to the meetup, it was like, hey, this restaurant has actively decided to accept Bitcoin. Let's all buy our drinks with Bitcoin. And everyone's like, yeah, and secretly pay with cash because they don't want to hold the Bitcoin. And I had a friend there who he was going there since like it started like 2012, and he's like, yeah, I think he said he spent like 10 Bitcoin on beer. So,
oh my god.
But, if that early, he probably has like a lot more than 10 anyway, so he's probably doing all right, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's funny.
For sure. All right, so I mean, I guess that's pretty much I have for you. I'm excited to see you at the conference. I guess you guys and Zebedee at the conference. It's going to be awesome. I think you guys are going to blow people away. I definitely got that treatment at the Tab conference, and I think you guys are going to bring an even better booth for Bitcoin 2022.
It's going to be great. Go there. Like it's just like, obviously I'm going to say this because it's my company, but going to a conference and just playing like Counter-Strike, or even if Counter-Strike's too hard, we have like a Mario Kart style game, and just to do that and win Bitcoin is amazing. You can probably get the price of your ticket back if you play it enough. So and yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I definitely got my the price of my ticket back for the Tab conference. So I was playing a bunch of games while I was there. It was before I'm in the industry, so I know Alex and I and a lot of people from Bitcoin Magazine who are hosting the conference are be running around with their heads cut off, basically. But it'll be a fun time nonetheless. For those that don't have their tickets, go to b.tc/conference. Use the code YTMAG or YTMAG for 21% off your tickets. Christian, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you want to send off before you sign out of here?
I would just tell people, if you want to start playing Bitcoin and gaming, follow us on Twitter at Zebedee. But we also have a special Twitter account just for the games, which I encourage you to follow. And that is the handle there is it's at ZBD_play. Go to zebedee.io, you'll find it, but follow that Twitter. We have these quests going on weekly where you can download these really easy to play mobile games and just kind of earn Bitcoin for fun, so play it yourself, introduce your friends to it. If you've got a friend who you want to get into Bitcoin, just send them over there. They can play a game, get Bitcoin. It's pretty awesome experience.
Christian, thank you so much for coming on. I know I already talked to Yuri and Mark. My goal is to get people playing games, or I'm going to be playing some of the Zebedee games or that are integrated with Lightning on Twitch in the coming weeks. So leading up to the conference, I'll be streaming from Twitch, playing some of the games. That's my goal. So it'll be excited to see that and do that on there. And then I'm excited to meet you guys in person again at the conference. Like I said, April 6th through 9th in Miami. So it should be a good time. Thanks. Alex, if you want to take it over. Or I'll send us right to an ad. So we got an ad for the conference, and then, I'll see you guys in a little bit.
right, guys.
I'm going to
we are
open up the
back.
space right now.
We are back. We are opening up a space to go deep on 2 channels. So if you guys want to get into the deep dive with Dylan LeClaire, CK, myself, Chris, Q, I guess whoever else joins, we're gonna get into it today on both Twitter Spaces and on the video side, YouTube and Twitch as well. So for the full experience, I guess you're probably already watching on YouTube, but we'll have people joining from Spaces as well. What are we talking about today, Dylan?
We're going to go over some of the stuff around the macro environment, some derivative stuff, basically, and then on-chain, but basically what Sam and I look at every day as part of our 2 roles with UTXO management, but more so people are familiar with the deep dive, which is the content that we put out for our newsletter every single day. So if you haven't checked that out, then go give that a look.
Nice. And we're still, I think Sam should be joining us on video if I'm right soon here too.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I think you'll ping him.
Yeah, our invite said for 5 minutes from now, so we're a little early.
Nice. How are you doing, Q? Did you get a chance to watch that last segment? Are you decompressing from your author interview?
I caught a little bit of it. I was doing some writing and finishing up tomorrow's Bitcoin adjacent equities stuff. I'm telling you, we need to give Chris more camera time. That's what we need.
Oh yeah, big time agree. What are we going over? Which equity tomorrow? Block.
We're gonna revisit Block. They've been in the news too much for us to ignore, and yeah, we got some good stuff to talk about tomorrow on that segment.
We should go. You know who hasn't been in the news enough? Saylor. What's Saylor up to this week? Haven't really heard anything from him.
Hijacking our videos.
Hijacking videos, yeah, and probably buying the dip, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised we haven't heard a Saylor like buy the dip announcement. I've seen more Bukele buying the dip announcements than Saylor, which wasn't usually the case. So remains to be seen.
Bukele's over in Turkey right now, isn't he?
Yeah.
Nice. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think the next nation state to adopt Bitcoin is going to be?
I mean, I wouldn't hate the idea of Turkey, just given what happens. There is the component of not the component, but the sheer fact that Turkey would be the first example of a country with a central bank adopting Bitcoin, however they adopt it, would just be huge in and of itself.
Agreed. Q, you got to join us on the Spaces side too, so people can hear you. Cool. Sam just showed up.
Chris says Panama or Paraguay. I don't disagree with that. I still think it would be
I can
weird.
get down with that.
It would just be weird for him to come to the conference to announce on behalf of a different nation state. That's still my MO. I wouldn't surprise
I don't think
me.
that's the announcement. I don't think that's the announcement. Unless his announcement is he's like buying a different country. I think his announcement will be like Bitcoin City or some other investment vehicle for people since the bonds. What is the state of the bonds? They were undersold, right?
What I don't remember.
The bond issue hasn't occurred yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of Saylor, we're talking about Saylor and Bukele. Both of them at the moment, I mean, they're definitely probably collected some dry powder, but both of them, if you're looking at like MicroStrategy being a leveraged Bitcoin holder, like right now, 108% of MicroStrategy's market cap is their Bitcoin allocation. So they're leveraged. Their average purchase is 30K. So I don't think Saylor, at least if I were him, I wouldn't be stacking at 40, and I'd just be collecting some dry powder and maybe setting some limit orders a little bit lower, protect that entry price, because there's some things to think about in terms of corporate financing. And yeah, he has a long time, and they're dated, right? Like if he has coupons due or principal due in 5 years or 7 years. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't look too good if he was, leveraging up billions of dollars and he was underwater. That equity would really dump hard. And so I imagine he's just stacking and staying patient and probably send some limits a little bit lower.
Do you think he's
Wait, hey, real quick. It looks like we have everyone here. Make sure that you if you put your volume on your phone all the way down on the Twitter Spaces. And I'm really excited to get into this. Before we continue the conversation, this is what the F is happening with Bitcoin, powered by the Deep Dive. We're here with Dylan and Sam from the Deep Dive and UTXO management and friends, myself, Alex, and Q. And we're here to talk for an hour about several topics pertinent to Bitcoin's price. So I guess before we get into the content, Dylan, do you want to jump in and kind of chat a little bit about what you and Sam do on the Deep Dive every day and what the newsletter looks like?
Yeah, so I work with Sam Rule to put together a daily newsletter, or I guess 5 days a week, about the Bitcoin markets, but we really try to provide context elsewhere in terms of like the macroeconomic backdrop, which Bitcoin pertains to, but also like having this Bitcoin thesis that it's the best money the world's ever seen, and we kind of overlay that into all of our analysis. But we dig deep into the stuff that like CNBC won't tell you about derivatives and all the stuff happening under the surface that we could see with the transparent nature of Bitcoin. And so yeah, check that out if you haven't. There's both free and paid tiers. So just join the free tier and see how it is. We think it's a really quality product. That's so far based on the feedback we've gotten. But yeah, we're just going to talk about a little bit of the state of the market today, and it's going to be a good riff.
All right, Alex, I'm sorry for rudely interrupting you there. Back to you. I know we have a bunch of topics that Dylan and Sam prepared, but yeah, I'll hand it back to you, sir.
No, this is y'all's show. I want to maybe we should introduce Sam to our YouTube audience. Sam, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work at Bitcoin Magazine and what you're thinking of the markets in general right now?
Yeah, for sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah. So, hey, everyone, I'm Sam. I've been with Bitcoin Magazine for probably about 4 or 5 months now, working directly with Dylan on the Deep Dive. Used to do a lot of previous market intelligence analytics work. So just bringing that over to Bitcoin, trying to make that accessible for everyone, trying to analyze the market in different ways. In terms of like, I guess like an intro with my current market outlook, kind of in this ranging consolidation, kind of boring market phase. I think boring is sometimes can be good for markets long term, but kind of everyone expecting kind of a parabolic Q4 move coming into the last few months. And I think what we got is maybe more cautious stand in the market, a lot more selling off, a lot more people maybe not bringing in the institutional demand at scale that we saw would be. So, currently as we sit right now, I'm always a Bitcoin buyer. I'm pretty long-term bullish on, the 5-10 macro year kind of viewpoint. I think we can get into some of the macro, but more cautious right now, more cautious in terms of like market sentiment and thinking of where the Fed is going to go with rate hikes. And so we can discuss some of that, but I think a unique time for Bitcoin coming into its third halving cycle here.
I want to jump in really quick. Thank you a lot for that introduction, Sam. And if you're not following Sam, you need to follow Sam. He's doing absolutely fantastic work. So check him out on Twitter. For everyone who's tuning in on Twitter Spaces, this is a perfectly fine way for you to enjoy this programming. But another great way to do so is on Bitcoin Magazine YouTube's live stream. So if you want to see all of our beautiful faces, then go hop into YouTube, type in Bitcoin Magazine, check out that live stream, and you'll get this exact same content, but over video. But we will be doing it all over video and Spaces. So whatever, pick your poison. Enjoy the rest of the show.
All right, what's first on the docket here? Fed hikes in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can just go over expectations because I don't think too many people know, but interestingly, there is a market for like when you hear the bankers throwing out these predictions for rate hikes and all of that, there is a pretty liquid market on the CME, the same exchange where that Bitcoin futures ETF houses their futures contracts. There's that for basically the Fed's fund rate. So during those kind of Wednesdays where Powell gets up and signals whether he's going to hike or taper or not, these markets move a lot. And recently, basically November and December, those markets really started to price in more and more rate hikes. And so currently, if we're just looking at, say, December of 2022, this contract is trading at $98.67. So what that's implying is the Fed's fund rate, the market's saying, is going to be 233 basis points. So that's signaling a lot of hikes. I'm sorry, 133 basis points. Bad math there. And so right now, with the Fed funds rate at 25 basis points, there's some hikes priced in. So we'll see if the NASDAQ, if Bitcoin, if so-called risk assets, which Bitcoin trades like, but over the long term, because of its properties, we know that it's more of a risk-off asset. But for the time being, these macro correlations aren't going to go away, and we'll see what that pain point threshold is for markets. Because I think the thing that everyone's watching out for is, when does it break, and when does Powell and other global central banks reverse any sort of tightening? And that's going to play out over all of 2022.
Dylan, we were talking a little bit about this on FedWatch yesterday, which was released in podcast form today. So if you haven't checked out that FedWatch, do check it out. But I personally am really skeptical that there will be any significant rate hiking. Maybe there'll be a little bit, and the market will kind of panic again, like it did. I think it was 2018 when when the Fed tried to tighten a little bit. But I think that a lot of this is just kind of job owning and trying to, set expectation and impression management more than it is they're actually going to raise interest rates in a meaningful way for a significant amount of time. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, if Powell set out to just talk down markets a little bit and, get the market a little bit actually out of position instead of just continuing to melt up, he's been doing a good job. And we'll see. I mean, Powell's been dovish and always known for his reversal, famously, like in 2018 there, when the NASDAQ fell like 20%. So we'll see. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that front, CK. I don't know how many they get in, but I do know everything's going to go berserk when he talks it back, and he will talk it back at some point.
Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty fair. I'm more of like, I'll believe it when I see it. I think I saw a chart earlier today that's like the last time Fed went for like a 50 basis point rate hike was 20 years ago. So it's, a unique monetary policy position and fiscal policy that, we've never quite been in before. So yeah, I like to think that now the markets are doing whatever they can to be cautious, preparing for this, pricing this in terms of rate hikes and expectations. And because of that, obviously risk assets are taking a hit, Bitcoin along with it. What's an interesting framework to think about the market too is this is an old kind of framework from Ray Dalio and Bridgewater, and is used by a few different macro analysts now, very data driven. It looks at the market in terms of different market regimes. So this year is expected to be an incredibly deflationary market, and being that growth is coming down, inflation is coming down, which is a tough environment for Bitcoin. That with monetary kind of policy tightening is a little bit of a tough recipe for a disaster or policy error that's pending. So I'm in the line of thinking I'll believe it when I see it in terms of the rate of change of what they do. I think they'll certainly try to stick to it and attempt to do it, and then we'll see how the market reacts.
Sam, I want to add to that point there. We were talking earlier a little bit about the type of entrants that came into the market over the last 2 years, because some Bitcoiners, and rightfully so, get not upset, but are saying like, it's not a risk on asset, it's my risk off asset, or it's my unit of account. But just the reality is, the reason Bitcoin's trading like it is because there's a whole lot of institutional capital that came in 2020 and 2021, especially if, like, for example, if you look at the Grayscale discount, Grayscale was buying hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin on behalf of institutional investors in 2021 and early 2021, late 2020. They were buying 10,000 Bitcoin at a time, certain days. And so all of those arbitrage traders who were looking to kind of take advantage of that risk-free spread, which ultimately wasn't risk-free, those were accredited investors, macro investors, institutional investors, and they're all treating it as a risk off. So when you see GBTC trading at a 26% discount, well, it's because those allocators are dumping on secondary markets that aren't very liquid. So I think that's a telltale sign of just the type of people that are trading this at the margin at the moment, besides the everyday buyers, are treating it just like they are a bag of tech stocks.
Yeah, it's a really good point that like in a way that the institutions are shifting the maybe demand narrative or the bigger reason why people are buying Bitcoin, and it can go along in that line of thinking that kind of Ray Dalio, hey, Bitcoin is a 1% to 2% portfolio allocation, and then once it's kind of in that portfolio of allocation, investors and people are holding it have to figure out where it sits in terms of asset allocation. And right now, it certainly looks like just performing like a high beta, like high growth tech stock type investment. And so in these like environments, when you're more cautious or we're thinking about more higher Fed rate hikes, I think we just have to think about the level of institutional capital that's in Bitcoin now and might be a main driver. So even if you're a Bitcoiner, someone like us who's looking at this as like a risk off asset over the next 5, 10, 20 plus years, it's just not quite there yet, and it's certainly not trading like that with all of the equity correlations going on.
I do want to pose a question to the two of you, especially talking about equity correlation. We saw at the end of last year 2 new ETFs get introduced. I believe it's going to be this week or next week. We're going to get yet another Bitcoin, this time a mining ETF. And as these new offerings come into the markets, what effect do you guys see it having on the overall price of Bitcoin? Like, I have my own theories on this, but I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking and seeing.
Yeah, I would just say, I think there's about 25 publicly traded miners are about to be with like a pending there's a couple that are pending to go public. And some of these are very small, less than $1 billion, but just like Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin itself continuing to just immerse itself in public capital markets is a big development. And yeah, so like in that sense, it'll probably be increasingly treated more as this like risk asset, like we're talking about, but as like a form or a representation of like the everything credit bubble. But getting access to the super cheap capital where you see disparities in like say like the traditional banking system versus what you can get in like the crypto ecosystem, if you want to think of it like that. And that will, I think, continue to close. And then whenever this kind of reversal happens that we're talking about, because there will be another bust and then an ensuing credit impulse or credit boom. And that's when Bitcoin decouples or outperforms everything else. But just, really then having access to the capital, you see like miners like, I forget who recently just bought, I think it was Bitfarms, bought like $50 million worth of Bitcoin, even though they mined it at $10,000 or like a very cheap level. They were just buying more, and they did it with some leverage. And so you'll continue to see that, I believe, and it's a net benefit, just additional adoption and getting it on more and more people in capital markets, their balance sheet.
Yeah, I'll just add on the mining ETF piece, it's kind of interesting that you're getting this new vehicle where you're getting all these vehicles and you're trying to satisfy all this appetite for Bitcoin demand, which can be anything from self-custody to futures to spot to miners, and miners are attractive for a lot of investors. So when you're thinking about now, they're just becoming, apart from their business, they're also just becoming like a Bitcoin kind of spot ETF vehicle in itself, as they're trying to increase their Bitcoin holdings as much as possible, potentially, satisfy some of this investor demand. And you see these in their 10Ks and their 10Qs talking about quite a bit, trying to increase these holdings, which I think is, really just giving more Bitcoin per share for each miner investor. So interesting way to look at it. I think the more kind of Bitcoin ETF products coming out or vehicles to kind of figure out what is better for demand for people right now, kind of better for the market overall.
I want to jump in really quick, and I know we have a lot of folks tuning in on Twitter Spaces. Just want to let everyone know that we are simul streaming this on both YouTube as well as on Twitter Spaces. So if you want to see this in video form, jump over to YouTube, check that out. And I want to, tell everyone that if you like the content that you're hearing here, if you find Sam and Dylan's analysis insightful, check out the deep dive. We have a free newsletter every single week and a premium newsletter every single weekday with several reports on a monthly and annual basis. So a lot of great stuff coming out of there, and they're working hard every single day to keep the readers on the cutting edge. So make sure to check that out. But yeah, in terms of what's happening with the market, I think you all touched in on this a little bit, but there is a really strong correlation between Bitcoin and tech stocks, and a lot of the same people that are trading Bitcoin are trading tech stocks. Is there anything like deeper that you guys can pull from that, and is this a correlation that you think will last? I know, Dylan, you did mention that eventually there'll be some sort of a separation or a break in that correlation, but I would love to dive down that a little bit deeper, just because it seems as though Bitcoin is monetizing, and that's something that is difficult to separate from other equities.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing, and the reason that it does meaningfully decouple at seemingly random times, right? If you just think about after the 2020 stimulus, when Bitcoin ranged at $9,000 for seemingly like 6 months, while everything in the legacy world mooned. Well, like what on-chain analytics can show you is oftentimes is these like supply demand dislocations occurring or unfolding under the surface, and it's not being shown by the market price, but like these massive accumulation periods that are occurring. And you see like with say long-term holder trends, which is just a classified UTXO that's held for about 155 days, basically technical term for Bitcoin being held for a long period of time. You see that long-term holders accumulate through bears and consolidation periods and actually distribute at the top of markets naturally, because the incentive to sell increases. And so we can start to see this accumulation just start to turn around again. And like stuff like a liquid supply and all these other metrics that we like to look at and post about can develop under the surface while the marginal buyer or seller is acting irrationally, or is basically trading on correlations, like what's happening today. So the smart money, which historically has been Bitcoin stackers, is a buyer at any level and taking away a little bit of that fixed slice 21 million pie every single day. And so when that marginal seller turns into a whole lot of marginal buyers at once, say when we get another round of quantitative easing or $1 trillion stimulus package, what happens is that Bitcoin decouples in a big way. And so I think we're seeing that accumulation occur a little bit under the surface, and the stackers of last resort are buying regardless of NASDAQ correlations or anything else. But that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's super well said. I think it just erodes over time, and it's hard to tell when. I mean, right now, I think it's probably closely correlated as everyone is trying to figure out this macro regime and trade off of it, and you have this huge speculation and pushed out on the risk curve. So everything looks like it just becomes kind of one bucket in investment there. And the way I try to think about it is maybe there's a level of capital, maybe it's 3-4 trillion or so when Bitcoin starts to just start behaving a lot more like its own asset class that's unique to the market. Who knows what that percentage level is, but it might be a good way to think about it. Okay, if it hits that first milestone of getting to some market cap related to gold trades in its own way, kind of builds its own narrative and education as an investment, it gets its own allocation that's kind of different from the market. So definitely I view it as like something that takes time, and it's like a slow grind over up as we have this just increasingly kind of like long-term holder mentality when people are coming to Bitcoin and holding and adopting it.
Q, you had something about leveraged Bitcoin buys.
Yeah, I I want to go back to this because it's been brought up now twice just in this conversation by Dylan. Firstly, when we were talking about MicroStrategy, and then just now with Bitfarms. And we're seeing it because capital is so cheap right now, rates are so low. But at the same time, I also see you, Dylan, absolutely shred the leverage buyers apart on Twitter. I'd love to hear from both of you on like what net effect do you see that having when there are leverage buyers in the Bitcoin market? Does that sort of weigh the price down a little bit? We've seen some flushes out in the past. I know you guys talk about it in the deep dive newsletter as well, but I just wanted to get your guys' sense on those type of buys.
Yeah, I mean, on a net effect, derivatives make, and this like on a net basis, they make no lasting effect on the Bitcoin price. But on the short time frame, because with every derivative contract, there's a buyer of the contract and a seller of the contract, and the exchange just facilitates the handling of the Bitcoin and the execution of the contract. That's all the exchange does. So if you go leverage buy a bunch of Bitcoin on a perpetual futures contract or a March 2022 futures contract, there's a seller of that, and they're promising to deliver you Bitcoin at that price. And usually that trades ahead of the Bitcoin price. But if there's too many longs, if there's too many ecstatic buyers and they're bidding up the price using Bitcoin as collateral to do it, well, some opportunistic whales will come in, and even though they're bullish on Bitcoin, they'll just sell the thing to push the price down to make those leverage buyers forced sellers. So you can think of leverage like there's mark-to-market leverage, and there's basically gambling casinos where you can slide up the leverage to 100x and bet Bitcoin just goes up 1% before it goes down 1% to see if you double your money or lose it all. Yeah, there's that leverage, and really that materially doesn't make too much of a difference because anybody that's doing that is just asking to lose money. But there's also leverage in the form of Michael Saylor having $1 billion software intelligence business and going to the bond market and borrowing for 6 years secured by his business and then just buying Bitcoin with it. And that liquidation risk is a lot different than the profile of someone trading on BitMEX or Binance or a lot of that. And so more often than not, these derivative dislocations are on the long side because everybody wants to long Bitcoin, to long crypto, and to make more Bitcoin longing Bitcoin, just like everybody wants the price to go up. But naturally you see more those liquidation events, the volatility, the derivative degenerates are ruining the price. Like it's usually on the long side. But every so often, say at the bottom of the bear market in 2019, when Bitcoin snapped up from 3,000, this summer at 30,000, you see shorts really get off sides, whether it's a narrative or anything else, and you'll see that opposite effect. So that's just kind of the derivative dynamic, but it exists in the legacy capital markets as well, with everything being collateralized by every other asset, and the Fed being kind of that marginal buyer of last resort. But in Bitcoin, the thing is there just is no buyer of last resort. It's just regular people just coming in to save the bid, you know?
Nice. About halfway through our show here, I just wanted to remind people before you go out and take on a bunch of leverage to buy Bitcoin, take a break from buying Bitcoin and buy your Bitcoin 2022 conference tickets, especially if you love this deep dive. Dylan LeClaire is going to be speaking, people. Sam Rule, Q, CK, we're all going to be there. We're all super excited. You get 21% off your tickets with promo code YTMAG. And with that, I'll pass it off to Q.
I do kind of want to touch on, and I know I'm going to throw Chris into the loop, and I'm so sorry. I have the chart pulled up if we want to show it as well, from your year-end newsletter, but the short-term holder cost basis has been a significant sort of, I like to call it a technical line that you guys have used and showcased previously on different iterations of your deep dive newsletter. And I just wanted to sort of touch, because correct me if I'm wrong, we're still trading below that current line, correct? And we're going to get that up onto the screen just shortly for all of you viewers.
Yeah, I can talk to this one a little bit. We just updated this yesterday. For a while, the short-term holder cost basis is also referred to as like the realized price. Kind of with on-chain, we can see basically the exact price that these coins are exchanging hands, and so then the market is then broken into short-term holder and long-term holder classifications. Short-term holder just being those recent buyers of coins. What are they doing? What are the price points they're talking about? So yeah, that one around 53,000 was, and it's gone down now to a little bit of like 49,000, a little bit over there, has been a key level to watch, because essentially, you want your new buyers in the market, short-term buyers, kind of demand coming in. You want them to be profitable, right? Or like in line with Bitcoin price. And if that gets too out of line with price and dislocation, I think right now they're down 15, 16% on average. And that's kind of a rough, short-term holder cost basis realized price is like a rough way to look at the market, because that can also include coins just moving on the network, not necessarily, being sold or bought as well, but just kind of trading addresses and wallets. But yeah, that's been a key one. And that's one we've talked about a lot when it was 53, to say like, hey, if we're going to continue in this parabolic type rally, or if we're going to see more strength in Bitcoin, really want to see the market surpass that level. So I think that's a really useful on-chain kind of metric to look at. And kind of with the reverse, you can see the long-term holder realized cost basis, which is much lower. It's around 17,000 or so. And there's very little times that price kind of goes below that long-term holder cost basis.
Yeah, and really just why that's important is like, if you look at every single bull market in the history of Bitcoin, it's essentially long-term holders corner the market, corner a large majority of circulating supply, and short-term holders, just coins that are young, is if you want to call it that, are basically competitively bidding or competitively trying to acquire their stake. And so during every bull market, you see this cost basis of these young coins. When the market price touches, it almost like acts like a super strong level of support, and it's defended very hard. And so when that falls, you're just kind of seeing the bullish structure, like Sam said, break down to lower levels, and then that long-term holder accumulation continues on. So it's almost like a back and forth yin yang relationship that we see, and we can quantify it all with the on-chain analytics.
Awesome. I guess then we would be remiss to not be also talking on the other side of that, the long-term holder cost basis, and sort of, can you walk us through a little bit of like what effect those two have off of each other? Is there one in particular that you're paying attention to? Are you guys sitting there like, dude, that is the wrong line, don't even look at it? Walk us through a little bit of that. Like, I'm a moving average guy when it comes to stocks and technical analysis, so that's why I love the different sort of lineages that you guys have created through the deep dive program.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to combine them together and just use realized prices, like more like just an aggregate market cost basis. We really like to look at that. That's been like this historical generational buying opportunity threshold, and that's at like 24,000. And if we got that low, it might be a little lower just because of some capitulation of coins. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of when you're looking at like Bitcoin and like the oscillator bull and bear markets, that realized price, that aggregate network cost basis is basically the line in the sand between like, you're not going to get a better entry or much of a better entry. And so, if you're feeling like risk adverse, throw a limit order at 25K and, just log off Twitter. But if not, just continue to stack. But I think that's what we really like to look at, is like the ratio between price and realized price. And you can kind of see some really cool trends with like local boom and bust cycles. And so we're kind of in the middle of a bust, with 40% down from the highs. I mean, I'm allocating to Bitcoin right now. I know UTXO is, and most of us are feeling really bullish. But yeah, that's probably, when you're thinking about like levels, that's probably, I would say, the lowest that we could expect.
Dylan, I find it funny to say that if you're conservative, then you should put a limit order. I'd say if you're not conservative, go with the limit order, and if you're conservative, then you should be stacking. You should just be stacking regularly, price agnostic, just dollar cost average on a regular basis.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I do. But yeah, I guess conservative in the fiat world sense.
This is saving advice, guys. So this is how you save. You just dollar cost average. Dylan,
buy that Bitcoin.
Sorry, Alex. Dylan, I wanted to ask you, and Sam, feel free to jump in too, but a lot of people are talking about much lower Bitcoin prices. And part of that is fueled by fears of interest rates being hiked. And part of that is kind of fears on like the stock market is just going to pull Bitcoin and other assets down as kind of macro uncertainty continues to mount. I mean, are these unfounded fears, or I guess like in terms of like, what are the bigger picture things that are happening that could cause the dollar to spike? Because really that's what makes asset prices go down, is dollars appreciating.
You did.
Yep, my bad. Yeah, I would say, there's a lot of ugly stuff happening in the world right now. Energy, the price of oil is going parabolic. And conversely, that's actually deflationary. Like paradoxically, that's deflationary in the sense that as oil price really spikes, it puts a lot of pressure on consumer and corporate balance sheet margins for everywhere on the planet. And so in that sense, it causes kind of a credit unwind eventually. That's if you look at like what happened in the housing crisis of 08, it was really like energy went parabolic and then fell off a cliff as there was almost like this huge credit impulse, money boom, and then all of a sudden it unwound. And that's kind of what happens with fiat and the cyclicality of it all. And I think we're in that downswing. And so in terms of Bitcoin, I'll share a chart here. Since the summer, we've seen basically the entire market's driven by derivatives. Just look at I shared a tweet earlier if you want to look at that, but on Twitter Spaces, but it's just the price overlaid with the derivative annualized basis. So like the spread of 3-month futures, and then you just annualize that, and price is traded 1-to-1 with that. So what you're kind of seeing is just incumbents are just bidding against each other almost, and like it's just incumbent capital and crypto markets that are bulls and bears, and the legacy allocators. Not that they're not here or not coming, but for the meantime, mostly that crowd is risking off. So that's already been priced in to a large extent. What brings lower levels? Well, 40K looks really strong from the spot side of things. We've seen a couple of rallies from the lows in this range that were led by spot markets, and you could see that reflected in the funding rates and the derivatives. But if that breaks down, you have a lot of potential leverage that's both transparent in terms of like being mark to market derivatives, but also not that very transparent, just basically debt in crypto markets that is all collateralized. And so that could lead to some sort of cascade into the 30s. Like it could, it's a non-zero probability. But we'll see if that comes.
Who wants to jump in? You're muted.
Of course I am. I'm curious also just to kind of get a sense from you guys. I'm always of the side that as we continue to introduce some sort of an asset that's not a traditional stock into these stock markets, we start to see this coupling effect. Dylan, you touched on the decoupling that we need to see for this sort of next bull run up. What are things you're keeping an eye on? Is it something out of the legislative area? Is it something out of the Fed, something they say, a policy shift or change? What are sort of clues that you're keeping an eye on for that decoupling?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say bigger picture, like aside from any like real analytical framework or like correlation or chart, you just see the broader adoption of Bitcoin happening daily. Like Intel yesterday, we're probably going to see it in other couple countries in 2022. You see the proliferation of the Lightning Network and that scaling faster than anybody could imagine. The 2017 bull market, Lightning wasn't even a thing. It was a beta concept. Now you're able to send money over Twitter in the form of dollars, yes, but it's using the Bitcoin network to do it. And it's seamless. So it's like Bitcoin is scaling in that sense. Bitcoin transactions to use the network, it's unbelievably unfairly cheap. So much so, it's so cheap that in 2022, there's FUD about the Bitcoin supply cap because fees are so low. So like Bitcoin is scaling at an incredible rate. And I think just broader adoption wise, like that's the reason to be bullish. Like there's no, like almost strip it down and no need for any sort of financial market analysis indicators, moving averages, none of that. And just being like, okay, Bitcoin is working and it's being adopted by millions and millions of more people. And there's a fixed supply. Like it's just, that's it. You know, it's almost as simple as it gets.
I want to jump in here too, because I find it absolutely mind blowing that people look at the Bitcoin mempool situation and fee situation and think, wow, we need to manufacture need for block space. Like it makes me think that people don't understand exponentials, because we don't even have a small sliver of mankind and a small sliver of all financial transactions happening on the world on Bitcoin yet. You know, the amount of fees, the amount of demand for block space should scale as, you know, Bitcoin becomes more and more part of the financial system. So to think that, oh, wow, we're in trouble when we don't even have 1% of humanity on Bitcoin yet, it just seems kind of crazy, because block space is absolutely finite. As far as we know. I mean, obviously, SegWit has found ways to increase it, and there's clever cryptography, and Lightning is a way to scale, but ultimately that block space is finite, and you know we just have so much more adoption to go. So there's a lot of exponential growth to come, and it doesn't really seem super realistic to be overly concerned. And if anything, I'm optimistic, because yes, Bitcoin can scale. Versus where there's other things that have massive fee issues right now that absolutely can't scale, given how they have even fewer users than Bitcoin.
Yeah, for what it does, Bitcoin has no competition in this world, and I think I'm just excited to have that we all have found it. Everyone here can celebrate and actually use block space. Now we get to settle our transactions. We can achieve final settlement. People living in the fiat world never really have that. Their assets are always at risk of confiscation. There is no final settlement in the fiat world, in my opinion, anyway.
I think Bitcoin's just property rights for 8 billion people. They just haven't realized it yet.
So where do we go from here, gents? I mean, what other tips have you been kind of following in the newsletter and out, in your analysis?
Yeah, I think it's just staying patient. That's part of the challenge and the fun of producing analysis and coverage and of what's happening daily. There's really, really crazy periods where it just seems like a million things are being thrown at you, and sometimes there's just periods where just to be patient and stick with your long-term thesis. And so we're still giving the coverage, but really a lot of the like on-chain stuff, the derivative stuff, really hasn't changed from a month ago, from a couple months ago. If anything, it's just kind of, again, this macro narrative that's being priced in that everybody's watching. I've been honestly watching equity markets sometimes more than I've been looking at like some of the Bitcoin analytics that I usually look at recently, because that's the game at the moment. But in terms of what to do, it's just, if you value your net worth in Bitcoin terms, which I think is a no-brainer thing to do, then you should be, getting to all-time highs every day. That's a no-brainer way to win over the long term, in my humble opinion.
What in equity markets are you following in particular? Like, what are the signals that you're looking for? What do you see as kind of leading indicators?
Well, yeah, leading indicators is tough. I mean, everybody wishes they had the secret sauce, but just looking at the indices, S&P 500, more so tech, the NASDAQ, looking at ARK Invest, a lot of like the more speculative things. If you want to look at the VIX, which is the volatility index of the S&P 500, it's kind of like a good tracker for risk off in markets. Also looking at the DXY, the dollar currency index. So the dollar's strength against a basket of fiats. And when that's increasing, then usually assets, including Bitcoin, take a hit because the dollar's appreciating. So just looking at all these things daily and waiting for a big move. But for the meantime, it seems like everybody's just kind of preparing for something. So maybe we get lulled to sleep a little bit longer.
I love it. I hope so. I hope we trade sideways for a while, man, because it's there's nothing like having your conviction, knowing your fundamentals, and we're just purchasing time for our future selves.
You muted on
for a little while.
Spaces.
Am I really? Shit, sorry, Spaces. I said there's nothing nothing better than a little sideways action to just appreciate all that we've learned in this Bitcoin space and just like continue, have a moment to breathe and actually catch up and explore new topics in Bitcoin and find new ways to trade value with the world and accumulate more Bitcoin, just upping your all-time high day by day, like Dylan said.
Some volatility would be fun going into the conference, but yeah, I agree. I can't hate it.
I mean, as a Bitcoin bull, you almost root for price to dump just because you know that your DCA and all that powder that you have laid off to the side, if you do have any powder, is just going to go a lot further. So it is pretty exciting when you do denominate your wealth in sats when sats are on sale.
Here's a funny story anecdote about myself. When I was asking for like when I was negotiating with BTC Inc., I asked for a large chunk of my salary to be denominated in Bitcoin at 57K. So I didn't get that, unfortunately, but fortunately, it looks like it may have helped.
Someone was looking after you. Someone wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I want to touch on, you brought up yesterday, like the mining, all these mining companies keep talking about hash rate, and expectations are at the end of this year, we're going to see a hash rate break above 300. Today, we just hit a new all-time high in the hash rate. We have Intel coming in, as you just brought up as well, to build out new miners, and this competition should hopefully help decrease the cost of miners as well as increase just their capabilities. What, if any, effects are you sort of paying attention to? How much are you giving credence to the present hash rate, and what are your expectations for the next 6 and 12 months?
Sam, give this one a go, man. You're pretty well versed on the mining world.
Yeah, I can touch on this a little bit. And also I'll just plug that Galaxy Research came out with a really good end of year mining report where they go over some of their projections. And we've done some too. When I think about like hash rate projections, I'm trying to gather all of the data that comes in from these public Bitcoin miners. And when I start thinking about like the supply chain issues with ASICs and that potentially dampening the growth in hash rate, every time I think about that, it's almost like every month they up their miners that they're buying and that they're planning for, and they're upping their hash rate expectations for the whole year of 2022. So when I start thinking of like a hash rate hitting 300 or doubling to like 360, 370, it starts to look like a real reality when these miners are delivering on these every single month. And so now it's just something that you can see this, whether it's in Marathon or Riot or a handful of other bit farms, the like. They're publishing this information all the time. And so if you start thinking like if they're have a majority share of the market and they're talking about growing at 200% plus in terms of their hash rate, and then they start delivering on that, you just start seeing 22 as this explosive year for hash rate growth. Now, still like to see what happens in the first few months to see how big of an impact supply chain issues are, but I feel like that's the best data, or some of the best data and information you can get on how many ASICs are really coming to the market. And a lot of these are kind of already planned out and purchased, and orders that were 4, 5, 6 months ago as well. So I think it's going to be a pretty explosive year for hash rate growth. I think a significant factor above what we saw in 2021.
Sam, I'm kind of suspect of a lot of the projections coming out of these public miners, because they're really kind of just using really like basic, linear scaling projections, and then they're making claims that they're going to increase hash rate a lot, but they're not taking into account all of the complexity and nuances with fabricating these ASICs, shipping these ASICs, and then breaking ground and building the facilities to house the ASICs and power the ASICs. And there's just so many moving pieces here. I can't imagine that these like 1 year projections, 6 months projections are going to be super accurate. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think if anything, when you do forecasting, you're going to get it wrong most of the time, and you're going to forecast to the upside. And I think a lot of them are forecasting a lot of upside because it's really a hash rate race to try to get as much as possible and to drive up a lot of the investor kind of equity and debt ability that they have right now too. So I think that's totally fair. I think, the good thing is we can see that data come in like month by month. And so it's not real time, but at least it's strong enough to see if those projections are coming true. So after a few months, I think we'll be able to tell a little bit more, if something like a 350, hash rate growth will come in for the year.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sam. I think at least that's fair. I'm still very suspect, but only time will tell. All the new people listening in on Spaces, we are simulcasting this across Spaces and YouTube and Twitch even. But I think the best place to get it in video is YouTube. So go over to Bitcoin Magazine YouTube, check out the live stream. We are simul streaming it, and you can see all of our beautiful faces while we conclude this conversation in the next 15 minutes. So check that out. But yeah, let's get back into it. Alex, Q, you guys have any more questions?
Before we jump back in, I just want to remind people to again go get your Bitcoin 2022 conference tickets. Get them today. They're scarce, just like Bitcoin. It's the best opportunity for you to find some work in Bitcoin that's going to happen all year, tied with the biggest party that's going to happen all year. It's going to be amazing. 21% off with discount code YTMAG. Take it away, Q.
I always love talking to people who are just so much smarter than me. Like Sam, I will be completely honest, the entire supply chain issue hasn't even been in my mind when I think about Bitcoin mining. And yet at the same time, I still consider it when I think about, oh, Tesla's not going to deliver their cars. Oh, this business is going to be short on supplies. Are we going to have enough lithium for batteries? So thank you. Now I have something new to look at and pay attention to there, my friend. What else out of the mining space? Because we are on this show obsessed with mining. We're going to be talking about it a lot over the next coming weeks. Are there anything else that you're paying attention to out of that space?
Yeah, I would just say if you buy Bitcoin mining stocks and you're not doing it from the base, you're doing it because you want to accumulate more Bitcoin, or ultimately, if you're bullish on a Bitcoin miner and you value Bitcoin the asset at all, you should be denominating your returns in BTC, and you should be looking at their monthly revenue and all of that in Bitcoin terms. So you have to use, if you want to use hash price, which is miner revenue divided by hash rate. Essentially, you see that's if you look at the miners, say Riot in USD, but if you say Riot / BTC, you're denominating that equity in Bitcoin terms. If you look at, say, hash price, which is miner revenue divided by the hash rate, which continues to go up, you'll basically find that a lot of these charts look pretty similar. That's kind of what they trade off of, is a multiple valuation on top of that hash price metric.
Dylan, is it possible to show us some of these charts? Do you have any of them in front of you that you can share on YouTube?
Sure. Yeah, I can try to pull some up here.
While he's pulling that up, another shout out. If you want to check out the charts, go over to YouTube. It's pinned to the top in the nest. First tweet has the link.
Cool. What am I sharing here? Google Chrome. Cool. All right. So I'm sharing right now. I'll pull up hash price in the Glassnode studio. But essentially, that's what you want to look at if you're trying to make a return in Bitcoin, or to decide when you want, when is it best to allocate capital to mining. You have to know what hash price is. It's a really fundamental way to kind of evaluate the economics of mining. Just one of the variables, along with a bunch of other things. So this is miner revenue per terahash, and just since 2017, it's basically fallen by 90%.
We don't see it, Dylan, by the way.
You don't see it?
No.
Stop sharing and reshare.
That's
He
unfortunate.
just doesn't like us.
So you've been looking at a blank screen this whole time.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll share this. Share my desktop.
Oh, there we go.
Cool. So that's hash price since 2017. That's since 2020. Basically the miner rebound. It got very, very profitable to mine Bitcoin when difficulty plunged after that China ban, and it still is very profitable. I mean, hash price in say if we want to call it summer of 2020 was 7 cents, 8 cents, and now it's at 22 cents. So they're still 3x more profitable in USD terms, but not quite what it was in April or say November.
That was a really great chart, Dylan. Thanks a lot. And I mean, I would love to learn more about that. I'm sure you've talked about it on the deep dive, but yeah, this just idea of the profitability to mine a Bitcoin. I've heard, people say that mining in Jamaica at 50 cents per kilowatt hour is profitable for some people. Can you talk about like what the average price of mining a Bitcoin is today? And how there's still an enormous amount of room for arbing that price difference between the market price and what some miners are acquiring Bitcoin at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no, we can kind of throw some models together to assume like a production cost of Bitcoin, but really it's different depending on your cost per kilowatt hour. And I will preface it with saying I'm not an expert here, and I would throw it to Sam on more of the exact numbers, maybe put him on the spot. But I think like the publicly traded miners are mining for like 10K per Bitcoin. And even at like some residential areas, like I know where I live, I think my production cost with an S9, which is not a state of the art Bitcoin miner, it's been in circulation for a few years, can still mine at good profit at like 35, 40K cost. So, anybody that's kind of still flooding like the Bitcoin, the network, or its security model, despite the halving event in 2020, miner revenues in dollar terms, which is still, again, like the global unit of measure, despite us living in like Bitcoin land, despite the halving event, they're 4x more profitable. So just something to think about when you're thinking about Bitcoin security model.
Yeah, I think the number range are like 2 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. I mean, ranging. I know if you're like a retail doing something with like Compass or something like that, and having that managed out, it's like 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So still, pretty profitable to do depending on like what price you're getting your ASICs at. I mean, it kind of moves with the Bitcoin price. If you're buying ASICs, 5-6 months ago, it's probably a great buy. But ranges with especially with new ASICs coming out, because these new models and seeing what prices are going to be, kind of really determines on the margin of like what a small miner can make in terms of profitability.
To me, it's really, really exciting to, just see people being able to home mine. I remember throughout the entire bear market, 2018, 2019, there was no confidence in any individual's ability to secure the network. I remember multiple people asked me, hey, should I mine? And I said, hell no, do not go mine. Go just buy Bitcoin. It's much easier. It's a surefire bet. That's what you should do. And in hindsight, if they were actually serious operators, that was actually bad advice, because if you were to have gotten and established yourself back in 2018, 2019, you would be raking in the dough all of 2020 and 2021. And again, the cost difference between what a miner acquires Bitcoin for versus what buying it on the spot market you can acquire it for, that is the reason to mine. And that is ultimately the incentive structure that drives the network forward. And it's really exciting to see old machines and residential Bitcoin hobbyists being able to, acquire KYC free sats that way. Obviously, if price does go down, if we enter into a bear market, those higher price miners are going to get squeezed. But I still think a lot of hobbyist miners are going to keep mining regardless of losing money in fiat terms, just to acquire those KYC free sats, and in a long enough time frame, it's going to pay off anyways if you're bullish enough.
And it's a secondary heat source. So up where I live, where it's 0 degrees and it's -10 some nights, you can fire them up in the basement and keep the house warm, and factor that into the economics of it all.
Dylan, I love your analysis where you kind of break down how debt and owning Bitcoin works. And, if you have any debt in any sort of context, and you're also hold Bitcoin, theoretically you're leveraged long Bitcoin. And I guess when you think of all things in terms of Bitcoin, the efficiency and the oneness with the network, it's kind of inevitable. And just heating your home with your ASIC is kind of the physical manifestation of that.
It's a great way to put it. I've never thought about it like that.
Cosmic thoughts always here, man. We got about 5 more minutes left on this chat. I think it's a good time for kind of closing words and maybe talking one last time about the deep dive. I, for one, think that in the next quarter, a lot of information, we're going to learn a lot about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin market, and how much the halving cycles rhyme, and how much they really impact the cost of Bitcoin. So I think that this is a really interesting, important quarter. And I think that this year in particular, we're going to learn an enormous amount of, how Bitcoin's incentives work. So, I'm going to be keeping an eye out on everything that's coming out on the deep dive, just because I find that is the best source of information, both as granular as on-chain to as zoomed out as the macro context. So I'm really excited for that. And yeah, I guess that's it for me. I'll pass it over to, I guess who wants to go next? You want to go, Alex?
Yeah, sure thing. I second that. Get yourself on the free tier. There's nothing like getting the deep dive every day. Start your day off right. Get some good reading in. Get your education on Bitcoin and the broader markets up to speed. And yeah, apart from that, I would say, again, get your Bitcoin 2022 tickets and come hang out with us. Come enjoy life in Miami with like-minded or not so like-minded Bitcoiners. Seems like everyone's going to be there, 35,000 plus people, all industries booming, businesses being made, partnerships that will last forever. Yeah, this is the event of the year. Promo code YTMAG for 21% off at checkout. And I'll pass it to Q.
You're muted.
I'm not going to say anything different than these guys. I mean, the deep dive article that I read is probably one of the best things I get to read each week. Like, I've just learned even more through this conversation today. And if any of you guys took away even one nugget of information from what both Sam and Dylan have talked about, I cannot stress enough how great and how hard these guys work on their product. Definitely take the time to check it out. It costs you no money just to subscribe to the free version, and you're going to get hooked very quickly. And there's a rumor that if we get 50,000 attendees, Dylan's going to do a series of hockey trick shots in the middle of a park in Miami. So let's get to 50,000 attendees.
Big if true. Yeah, this is a fun combo, guys. Appreciate all the kind words with the deep dive. We work hard on it for sure. We're dropping our daily dive shortly after this, so don't miss it. And until next time.
What are you covering on the daily dive? Dylan?
We're talking about GBTC hitting that all-time low discount to net asset value and its implications on the market, and just giving an overview of how the GBTC structure works, the product structure works for those that are unaware. So that's what we'll be covering today.
Awesome. Sam, you want to close this out?
Yeah, let's do it. Excited about what we got coming with a deep dive, doing a lot of different analytics, visualizations. Right now, analyzing a lot of and talking about some on-chain metrics over kind of 20 cycle indicators and where they're at in terms of kind of bottom, top metrics in the cycle. I'm personally excited to see how kind of the halving cycle dynamics play out, but I'm mostly looking at kind of getting a handle on institutional demand that potentially can come in over the 2 or 3 months, and looking at the data that's coming in there, as I think that's going to be a big catalyst. So yeah, like everyone said, you can see we'll publish work on Twitter. You can sign up for the free version, and if you like that, we got a paid version as well. So thanks for having us, guys.
So shout out Sam for
Anytime.
having the newest issue of Bitcoin Magazine and being the only one on this stream who actually has a Bitcoin Magazine product up. Employee of the month.
Today.
We are the product, Q. Dylan is the product. I want to, we can wrap this up on Spaces, guys, but for my YouTube folks, we're going to give away some free Bitcoin for you guys. So there's going to be a QR code on screen. That's going to get people coming in from the Spaces now. We should announce that at the beginning. We're going to put a QR code on screen for the Earn Carrot app. You get first come, first serve, giving away some sats. Happy to announce we did get a purchase, some Bitcoin tickets during the stream. So that means you guys get to release the sats. And I'm excited to see whoever got those tickets at the conference. Always appreciated. Keep it up, guys. That's it for today. Long one, but we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be probably starting the stream a little bit earlier to do coverage of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Bitcoin mining. So we'll be covering that directly after. You can watch it with us and then tune in. We're going to have some kind of specialists in to talk about that with you guys. So that's it for today. We'll catch you tomorrow. Have a good one.